Welcome crew, guys, gals, ghouls, and other worldly beings. Let's climb aboard the mothership, secure our tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. I'm your ghostess, TessaTNT, broadcasting from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you. And thanks so much for coming and hanging out with me this evening. As you know, it's an honor and a privilege to have you hanging out with me and having some story time. If you want to listen in your free time, whether you're working it or working out, feel free to look up We Are Paradox Media, basically wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we're also on YouTube, shows that you can listen to and watch, and that's also under We Are Paradox Media. Also, I wanted to get into our top 16 from 425 to 524, and we have our number one is the United States, number 2 is France, number 3 is Germany, number 4 is Japan, number 5 is Canada, number 6 is Pakistan, number 7 is Kuwait, number 8 is South Africa, number 9 Brazil, 10 Switzerland, 11 Finland, 12 UK, 13 India, 14 South Korea, 15 the Philippines, and number 16, we have Singapore. Thank you, everyone out there who does tune in and listen and download the shows. It's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome indeed. Alright, so for story time, we're getting back into our book. I'm going to pull it up here. The best of the best horror of the year. So, yeah, there's like so many different authors in here. So I guess this would be what would be in the cover. A group of mountain climbers caught in the dark fight to survive their descent. In the British countryside, hundreds of magpies ascend into the sky higher and higher until they seem to vanish into the heavens. A professor and his student trek a zombie horde in order to research zombie behavior. An all-girl riding school has sinister secrets. The town rails in vain against a curse inflicted upon it by its founders. For more than 3 decades, editor and anthologist Ellen Datlow, winner of multiple Hugo, Bram Stoker, and World Fantasy Awards, has had her finger on the pulse of the horror genre, introducing readers to writers whose tales can unnerve, frighten, and terrify. This anniversary volume, which collects the best stories from the first 10 years of her annual The Best Horror of the Year anthology series, includes fiction from award-winning and critically acclaimed authors Neil Gaiman, Maria Llewellyn, Laird Barron, Gemma Files, Stephen Graham Jones, and many more. I'm not sure what chapter we're on here, but it says in a cavern in a canyon. I kind of want to go back to see if that is what this is. Let me pause really quick while I do that so you're not waiting on me. And it does appear that this is, indeed, In a Cavern in a Canyon by Laird Barron. Uncle Ned's eyes were red as a Kotz cone. He slapped the coffee machine. I didn't have a perfect position and my light was weak, but I saw plenty. The Viking laid on top of somebody. This somebody was super skinny and super pale, lots of wild hair. Their arms and legs were tangled so you couldn't make sense of what was going on. I thought he had a woman there in the weeds and they was a-fucking. Their faces were stuck together. The young biker leaned over his buddy and then yelped and stumbled backward. The skinny, pale one shot out from under the Viking and into the darkness. Didn't stand, didn't crouch, didn't even flip over. Know how a mechanic rolls from under a car on his board? Kinda that way, except jittery. Moved like an insect scuttling for cover. Best I can describe it. A couple seconds later, the huge biker shuddered and went belly crawling after the skinny fella. What I thought I was seeing him do. Anyhow, his arms and legs flopped, although his head never lifted, not completely. He just skidded away, Superman style, his face planted in the dirt. Meanwhile, the young biker hauled ass toward the road, shrieking the whole way. My flashlight died. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, scared shitless, trying to get brain out on neutral. I wanted to split. Hell yeah, no fucking way I was gonna tramp around on these flats by myself. I'm a hunter, though. Those instincts kicked in, and I decided to play it cool. Your dad always pegged me for a peacenik hippie because I didn't do now. I'm smarter is the thing. Got a knife in my pocket, and half the time I'm packing heat too. Had me skin a knife, and let me say, I kept it handy as I felt my way through the bushes and the brambles. Got most of the way to where I could see the lights of the cars on the road. Somebody whispered, "Help me," real close and on my flank. Scared me, sure. I probably jumped 3 feet straight up, and yet it was the saddest voice I can remember. Woeful like a lost child or a wounded woman or a fawn or some combination of those cries. I might have turned around and walked into the night, except a state trooper hit me with a light. He'd come over the hill looking after the biker went bug shit. I think the cop thought the 3 of us were involved in a drug deal. He sure as hell didn't give a lick about a missing Hell's Angel. He led me back to the clusterfuck on the highway, and I spent the rest of the night shivering in my car while the bulldozers and dump trucks did their work. He punched the coffee machine. "Easy, killer," I said, and gave an apologetic smile to the increasingly agitated Bernice. I patted the seat next to me until he came over and sat. "What happened to the biker, the big guy?" Uncle Ned had sliced his knuckles. He clenched his fist and watched the blood drip into the tiles. Cops found him that summer in the inlet, not enough left for an autopsy. The current and the fish had taken him apart. Accidental death, they decided. I saw the younger biker at the Gold Digger. Must have been 5 or 6 years after the Good Friday quake. He acted like he'd forgotten what happened to his partner until I bought him the 5th or 6th tequila. He got a real close look at what happened. Said that to him. The gurgling was more of a slurping, an animal lapping at a gory supper. Then he looked me in the eye and said his buddy got snatched into the darkness by his own guts. They were coming out of his mouth, and whatever it was out there gathered him up and reeled him in. Holy shit, Uncle Ned. Goose pimples covered my arms. That's nuts. Who do you think was out there? The boogeyman, whatever it is that kids think is hiding under their bed. You tell Dad? Probably not, huh? He's a stick in the mud. He'd never buy it. Well, you don't either. Guess that makes you stick in the mud too. The apple, the tree, gravity. Maybe you'd be surprised what your old man knows. Uncle Ned's expression was shrewd. I've been all over this planet between 66 and 74. I roamed, past the peace pipe with the Lakota, ate peyote with the Mexicans, drank wine with the Italians, and smoked excellent bud with a whole lot of other folks. I get bombed enough or stoned enough, I ask if anybody else has heard of the Help Me Monster. What I call it, the Help Me Monster. The description evoked images of Sesame Street and plush toys dancing on wires. Grover the Psycho Killer, I said, hoping he'd at least crack a smile. I also hoped my uncle hadn't gone around the bend. He didn't smile. We sat there in one of those long, awkward silences while Bernice coughed her annoyance and shuffled papers. I was relieved when Sally Mackey finally stuck her head into the room and called my name. The nurse wanted to send me to Anchorage for x-rays. No way would Dad authorize that expense. No veterinarians and no doctors. Those were ironclad rules. When he discovered Uncle Ned took me to the clinic, he'd surely blow his top. I wheedled a bottle of prescription-strength aspirin and a set of cheapo crutches on the house and called it square. A mild ankle sprain meant I'd be on the crutches for days. I added it to the tab of Shaw family dues. Dad never came home. I cried. The kids cried. Bit by bit, we moved on. Some of us more than others. I won't bore you with the nightmares that got worse and worse with time. You can draw your own conclusions. That strange figure in the woods, Dad's vanishing act, and Uncle Ned's horrifying tale coalesced into a witch's brew that beguiled me and became a serious obsession. Life is messy and it's mysterious. Had my father walked away from his family, or had he been taken? If the latter, then why Dad and not me or Uncle Ned? I didn't crack the case and didn't get any sense of closure. No medicine man or antiquarian popped up to give me the scoop on the ancient enemy that dwells in the shadows and dines upon the blood and innards of good Samaritans and hapless passerbys. The closest I came to solving the enigma was during my courtship with husband number 2. He said a friend of a friend was a student biologist on a research expedition in Canada. His team and local authorities responded to a massive train derailment near a small town. Rescuers spent 3 days clearing out the survivors. One day 4, they swept the scattered wreckage for bodies. This student, who happened to be Spanish, and 3 fellow countrymen were way out in the field after dark, poking around with sticks. One of them heard a voice moaning for help. Of course, they scrambled to find this wretched soul. Late to the scene, a military search and rescue helicopter flew overhead, very low, its searchlight blazing. When the chopper had gone, all fell silent. The cries didn't repeat. Weird part, according to the Spaniard, was that in the few minutes they'd frantically tried to locate the injured person, his voice kept moving around in some bizarre acoustical illusion. The survivors switched from French to English and finally to Spanish. The biologist claimed he had nightmares of the incident for years afterward. He dreamed of his buddies separated in a dark field, each crying for help, and he'd stumble across their desiccated corpses one by one. He attributed it to the guilt of leaving someone to die on the tundra. My husband-to-be told me that story while high on coke and didn't mention it again. I wonder if that's why I married the sorry son of a bitch. Just for that single moment of connectedness, a tiny and inconstant flicker of light in the wilderness. High noon on Sunday night, going on 3,800 years. I've expected this, or something like this, even though the entity represents, with its very jack-in-the-box manifestation, a deep, dark mystery of the universe. What has drawn it to me is equally inexplicable. I've considered the fanciful notion that the Shaws are cursed and Mr. Help-Me is the instrument of vengeance. Doesn't feel right. I've also prayed to Mr. Help-Me as if he, or it, is a death god watching over us cattle. Perhaps it is. The old gods wanted blood, didn't they? Blood and offerings of flesh. That feels more on the mark, or it could be the simplest answer of them all. Mr. Help-Me is an exotic animal whose biology and behavior defy scientific classification. The need for sustenance is the least of all possible mysteries. I can fathom that need, at least. A window must be open in my bedroom. Cool night air dries the sweat on my cheeks as I stand in the darkened hall. The air smells vaguely of spoiled meat and perfume. A black, emaciated shape lies prone on the floor, halfway across the bedroom threshold. Long, skinny arms are extended in a swimmer's pose. Its face is smudged of white and tilted slightly upward to regard me. It is possible that these impressions aren't accurate and that my eyes are interpreting as best they can. I slap a switch, the light flickers on but doesn't illuminate the hall or the figure sprawled across directly beneath the fixture. Instead, the glow bends at a right angle and gathers on the panel wall in a diffuse cone. "Help me," the figure says. The murmur is so soft it might have originated in my own head. I'm made of sterner stuff than my 16-year-old self. I resist the powerful compulsion to approach, to lend maternal comfort. My legs go numb. I stagger and slide down the hall into a seated position. Everybody has had the nightmare, the one where you are perfectly aware and paralyzed and an unseen enemy looms over your shoulder. Difference is, I can see my nemesis, or at least its outline, at the opposite end of the hall. I can see it coming for me. It doesn't visibly move except when I blink, and then it's magically 2 or 3 feet closer. My mind is on overdrive. What keeps going through my mind is that predator insects seldom stir until the killing strike. Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling Clementine, you were lost and gone forever, dreadful sorry Clementine. I hum tunelessly like Graham used to after her brain softened into mush. I'm reverting to childhood, to a time when Dad or Uncle Ned might burst through the door and save the day with a blast of double-aught buckshot. It finally dawns upon me that I'm bleeding. I'm sitting in a puddle of blood. Where the blood is leaking from, I've not the foggiest notion. Silly me. That's why I'm dead from the waist down. My immobility isn't a function of terror, pheromones, or the occult powers of an evil spirit. I've been pricked and envenomed. Nature's predators carry barbs and stings. Those stings deliver anesthetics and anticoagulants. How venom will travel, I chuckle. My lips are cold. Help me, it whispers as it plucks my toes, testing my resistance. Even this close, it's an indistinct blob of shadowy appendages. I have one question, I enunciated carefully, the way I do after one too many shots of Jaeger. Did you take my dad on August 15th, 1977, or did that bastard skip out? Me and my brother got a steak dinner riding on this. Help me. The pleading tone descends into a lower timbre, a satisfied purr. One final trick up my sleeve, or in my pocket. Recently, while browsing a hardware store for a few odds and ends, I'd come across a relic of my youth, a blacklight. Cost a 10 spot on special in a clearance bin. First, it made me smile as I recalled how all my childhood friends illuminated their funkadelic posters. Kids as gleeful as if we'd rediscovered alchemy. Later in college, blacklight made a comeback on campus, and the parties were where we attended. It struck a chord, got me thinking, wondering. Any creature adapted to distort common light sources might be susceptible to uncommon sources, say infrared or blacklight. I hazard a guess that my untutored intuition is on the money and that thousands of years of evolution hasn't accounted for a $20 device used to find cat piss stains in the carpet. I raised the box with the blacklight filter in my left hand and thumbed the toggle. For an instant, I behold the intruder in all its malevolent glory. It recoils from my flashlight, a segmented hunter of soft prey retreating into its burrow. A dresser crashes in the bedroom, glass shatters, and the trailer rocks slightly, and then it's quiet again. The moment has passed except for the fresh hell slowly blooming in my head. The black light surprised it and nothing more. Surprised and amused it. Alright, where was I? Sorry, I had an incoming. The creature's impossibly broad grin imparted a universe of corrupt wisdom that will scar my mind for whatever time I have left. Mr. Helpme's susurrating chuckle lingers like a psychic sting. Sometimes the spider cuts the fly from its web. Sometimes nature doesn't sink in those red flags, red fangs. Sometimes it chooses not to rent with its red claws. I reprieve isn't necessarily the same weight as a pardon. Inscrutability isn't mercy. We Shaws are tough as shoe leather. Doubtless I've enough juice left in me to crawl from the phone and signal the cavalry. A quarter or two of typo and I'll be fighting fit with a story to curl your toes. The conundrum is whether I really want to make that crawl or whether I should close my eyes and fall asleep. Did you take my father? I've spent most of my life waiting to ask that question. Is Dad out there in the dark? What about those hunters and hikers and kids who walk through the door and onto the crime pages every year? I don't want to die, truly I don't. I'm also afraid to go on living. I've seen the true, unspeakable face of the universe, a face that reflects my lowly place in its scheme. And the answer is yes. Yes, there are hells, and in some you are burned or boiled or digested in the belly of a monster for eternity. Yes, what's left of Dad abides with a hideous mystery. He's far from alone. What would Clint Eastwood do? Well, he would have plugged the fucker with a .44 Magnum for starters. I shake myself. Mid-50s is too late to turn into a mope. I roll onto my belly, suck in a breath, and begin to go down the agonizing journey toward the coffee table where I left my purse and salvation. Hand over hand, I drag my scrawny self. It isn't lost on me what I resemble as I slather a red trail across the floor. Laughing hurts. Hard not to, though. I begin to sing the refrain from Help over and over and over. A Lockthon, Livia Llewellyn. Taking definite form toward the middle of the century comes the revival of romantic feeling, the era of new joy in nature and in radiance of past times, strange scenes, bold deeds, and the incredible marvels. We feel it first in the poets whose utterances take on new qualities of wonder, strangeness, and shuddering. That is a quote by H.P. Lovecraft from Supernatural Horror in Literature. On this planet, in this universe, geology is geology. The land simply is, and it is nothing else. Mountain ranges and forests and nature in its entirety are not sentient. They have no wisdom or knowledge to impart upon the world, and whatever emotional expectations each individual traveler draws from their journeys into the wild is of their making alone. The landscape speaks to us, but it's only we who are doing the talking, or so we believe. I myself am not quite as certain, and I suspect many of us feel the same. Lovecraft certainly didn't believe this to be the truth of our world. There was a cosmic beauty in the hypnotic landscape through which we climbed and plunged fantastically. Lovecraft wrote in The Whisperer in the Darkness, and I seemed to find in its necromancy a thing I had innately known or inherited, and for which I had always been vainly searching. Time and time again he wrote of the land around us as alive in ways we barely comprehend, watching us, calling out to us, drawing us in. How then can we really know for certain that the conversation is so one-sided, that those resplendent and horrifying feelings of mysterium, tremendum et fascinans, that the supernal wilderness of the world draws from us aren't the cosmic answers to questions we instinctively ask. Living as we do today, in cities and suburbs subtly crafted as if to seem once removed from unstoppable nature, we forget that we came from the land, We are wet mortal ghost slivers of the geologic forces out of which every living thing evolved. The land is always with us because it is us, and when in ways wondrous and strange we are called home, we have no choice but to go. North Bonneville, 1934. Ruth sits in the kitchen of her company-built house, slowly turning the pages of her scrapbook. The clock on the bookcase chimes 10 in the next room, the only other room she hears her husband getting dressed. He's deliberately slow on Sundays, but he's earned the right. Something about work he's saying from behind the door, something about the men. Ruth can't be bothered to listen. She stares at the torn magazine clipping taped to a page. It's a photo of an East Coast socialite vacationing somewhere in the southern tropics. A pretty young woman in immaculate white linens, lounging on a bench that encircles the impossibly thick trunk of a palm tree. All around the woman and the tree, a soft manicured lawn flows like a velvet sea, and the skies above are clear and dry. Ruth runs her free hand across the back of her neck, imagining the heat on the photo, the lovely bite and sear of an unfiltered sun. Her gaze wanders up to the ceiling. Not even a year old, and already rain and mold have seeped through the shingled roof, staining the cream surface with hideous blossoms. It's supposed to be summer, yet always the overcast skies in this part of the country, always the clouds and the rain. She turns the page, more photos and ephemera, all things that over the years have caught her eye. But all she sees is the massive palm, lush and hard and tall, the woman's back curved into it like a drowsy lover, and empty space around them, above and below, as if they are the only objects that have ever existed in the history of time. Henry walks into the room and grabs his coat, motioning for her to do the same. Ruth clenches her jaw and closes the scrapbook. Once again, she's made a promise she doesn't want to keep, but she doesn't care enough to speak her mind, and anyway, it's time to go. Their next-door neighbor steers his rusting car down the dirt road, past the edges of the town and onto the makeshift highway. His car is one of many, a caravan of beat-up trucks and buggies and jalopies. Ruth sits in the back seat with a basket of rolls on her lap, next to the other wife. It started earlier in the week as an informal suggestion over a session of grocery shopping and gossip by some of the women, and now almost 40 people are going. A weekend escape from the routine of their dreary lives to a small park farther down the Columbia River, far from the massive construction site for the largest dam in the world, which within the decade will throttle the river's power into useful submission. The wives will set up the picnic, a potluck of whatever they can afford to offer, while they gossip and look after the children. The men will eat and drink, complain about their women and their jobs and the general rotten state of affairs across the land, and then they'll climb a trail over 800 feet high to top of an ancient volcanic core known as Beacon Rock. The company wife speaks in an endless paragraph, animated and excited. Billy or Betty or Becky, some childish, interchangeable name. She's 4 months pregnant and endlessly vocally grateful that her husband found work on a WPA project when so many in the country are doing without. Something about the Depression, something about the town, something about schools. Ruth can't be bothered. She bares her teeth, nods her head, makes those ridiculous clucking sounds like the other wives would. All those bitches with airs. 2 hours of this passes, the unnatural rattle and groan of the engines, the monotonous roll of pine-covered hills, the image of the palm tree has fled her mind. It's only her on the lawn alone, under the unhinged jaw of the sky. Something about dresses, something about the picnic, something about a cave. Ruth snaps to attention. There's a map in her hands, a crude drawing of what looks like a jagged-topped egg covered in zigzagging lines. This is the trail the men are going to take, the wife is explaining. Over 50 switchbacks, a labyrinth, a maze, the caravan has stopped. Ruth rubs her eyes. She's used to this, these hitches of lost time. Monotonous life, gloriously washed away in the backwater tides of her waking dreams. She stumbles out of the car, swaying as she clutches the door. The world has been reduced to an iron-gray bowl of silence and vertigo. Contained, yet infinite. Mountains and space and sky all around. With the river diminished to a soft mosquito's whine, nausea swells at the back of her throat, and a faint, pain-tinged ringing floods her ears. She feels drunk, unmoored. Somewhere Henry is telling her to turn, to look. There it is, she's saying, as he tugs her sleeve like a child. Ruth spirals around, her tearing eyes searching the horizon until finally she... Something about... the rock. Ruth lifts her head. She's sitting at her kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee at her hand. The scrapbook is before her, open, expectant to her other hand, has a page raised halfway through the turn. On the right side of the book, the woman in the southern tropics reclines at her palm in the endless grass sea, waiting. Henry stands before her, hat on head, speaking. Ruthie, quit your dreaming and get your coat on. Time to go. Go where? Like we planned, to Beacon Rock. The clock on the bookcase chimes 10. Outside, a plane flies overhead, the sonorous engine drone rising and falling as it passes. Ruth rubs her eyes, concentrating. Every day in this colorless town at the edge of this colorless land is like the one before. Indistinguishable and unchanging. She doesn't remember waking up, getting dressed, making coffee, and there's something outside. A presence, an all-consuming black static wave of sound, building up just beyond the wall of morning silence. Behind the plane's mournful song, she furrows her brow, straining to hear. Henry speaks, and the words sound like the low rumble of avalanching rock as they fall away from his face. It's language, but Ruth doesn't know what it means. Give me a moment. I'm gonna be sick, Ruth says to no one in particular as she pushes away from the table. She doesn't bother to close the front door as she walks down the rickety step into the warm air and a hard gray sun. Ruth stumbles around the house to the back where she stops, placing both hands against wooden rails as she bends down, breathing hard, willing to vomit, to stay down. Gradually, the thick, sticky feeling recedes and the tiny spots of black that dance around the corners of her vision fade and disappear. She stands and starts down the dusty alley between the row of houses and shacks. Mountains slung low against the far horizon of the earth, shimmering green and gray in the clear, quiet light. Ruth stops at the edge of the alley, licking her lips as she stands and stares. Her back aches. Beyond the wave and curve of land, there is... Ruth bends over again, then squats, cupping her head in her hands, elbows on knees. This day already happened. She's certain of it. They drove along the dirt highway, the woman beside her, mouth running like a hurricane. They hung to the edges of the wide river, and then they rounded the last curve and stopped, and Ruth pulled out of the car like saliva around the heavy shaft of a cock. And she looked up and now some company brat is asking her if she's okay. Hey lady, are you sick or just taking a crap? Giggling as he speaks. Ruth stands up and slaps him crisp and hard. The boy gasps, then disappears between the houses. Ruth clenches her jaw, trying not to cry as she heads back around the house. Henry stands beside the open car door, ruin and rage dancing over his face. Her coat and purse and the basket of rolls have been tossed in the back seat next to the wife. She's already talking up a storm, rubbing her belly while she stares at Ruth's. Her eyes and mouth all smug and smarmy in that oily, sisterly way, as if she knows, as if she could know anything at all. The sky above is molten lead, bank after bank of roiling dark clouds vomiting out of the celestial foundries. Ruth cranks the window lever, presses her nose against the crack. The air smells vast and earthen. The low mountains flow past and frozen antediluvian waves. Something about casseroles, the company bitch says. Something about gelatin and babies. Something about low tides. Ruth touches her forehead, frowns. There's a hole in her memory, borderless and black, and she feels fragile and small. Not that she hates the feeling, not entirely. Her hand rises up to the window's edge, fingers splayed wide as if clawing the land aside to reveal its piston-shaped core. The distant horizon undulates against the dull light, against her flesh, but fails to yield. It's not its place to. She knows she's already been to Beacon Rock. Lost deep inside, a trace remains. She got out of the car and she turned in the mountains and the evergreens, and thrusting up from the middle a geologic eruption, a disruption hard and wide and high, and then nothing. Something was there. Something was there. She knows she saw it, but the sinkhole in her mind has swallowed all but the slippery edges. Her mouth twists, silent, trying to form words that would describe what lies beyond that absence of sound and silence and darkness and light, outside and in her head. As if words like that could exist, and now they are there. The car is rounding the highway's final curves. Before the park, she rolls down the window all the way and sticks her head and right arm out. A continent behind, her body is following her arm like a larva, wriggling and popping out of desiccated flesh, out of the car, away from the shouting, the ugly engine sounds, into the great, shuddering, static storm breaking all around. She saw Beacon Rock then and now. The rest, they all saw the rock, but she saw beyond it. Under the volcanic layer, she saw it, and now she feels it. Now she hears, and it hears her too. Falling, she looks up as she reaches out, and the clock on the bookcase chimes 10. Her fingers cramping, slowly uncurl from a cold coffee cup. Henry is in the other room getting dressed. Ruth hears him speaking to her, his voice tired, water dribbling over worn gravel. Something about the company picnic, something about malformed, moldering backwaters of trapped space and geologic time, something about the rock. Tiny spattering sounds against paper make her stare up to the ceiling, then down at the table. Droplets of blood splash against the open page of her scrapbook. Ruth raises her hand to her nose, pinching the nostrils as she raises her face again. Blood slides against the back of her throat, and she swallows. On the clipping, the young socialite's face disappears in a sudden crimson burst, like a miniature solar flare erupting around her head, enveloping her white-teethed smile. Red coronas everywhere, in her linen-draped lens, on the thick bark of the palm, on the phosphorus bright velvet lawn. Somewhere outside, a plane drones overhead, or so it sounds like a plane. No, a plane, a wide expanse of plain, a moorless prairie of static and sound. All the leftover birth and battle and death cries of the planet, jumbled into one relentless wave streaming forth from some lost and wayward protrusion at the earth's end. Ruth pushes the scrapbook away and wipes her drying nose with the edges of her cardigan and the backs of her hands. Her lips open and close in silence as she tries to visualize, to speak the words that would describe what it is that's out there, what waits for her, high as a mountain and cold and alone. What is it that breathes her name into the wind like a mindless burst of radio static? What pulses and booms against each rushing thrust of the wide river, drawing her body near and her mind away? She saw, and she wants to see it again, and she wants to remember. She wants to feel the ancient granite against her tongue. She wants to rub the open leg against it until it enters and hollows her out like a mindless pink shell. She wants to fall into it and never return here again. Not again, she says to the ceiling, to the walls as Henry opens the door. Not again, not again, not again. He stares at her briefly, noting the red flecks crusting her nostrils and upper lip. Take care of that, he says, grabbing his coat. He motions at the kitchen sink, always the same journey and the destination never any closer. Ruth quickly washes her face, then slips out the door behind him into the hot sun this morning. The company wife is in the back, patting the seat next to her. Something about the weather, she says, her mouth spitting out the words in little squirts of smirk, while her eyes dart over Ruth's wet red face. She thinks she knows what that's all about. Lots of company wives walk into doors. Something about the end of Prohibition. Something about the ghosts of a long-ago war. Ruth sits with her head against the window, eyes closed, letting the one-sided conversation flow out of the woman like vomit. Her hand slips under the blue checked dish towel covering the rolls, and she runs her fingers over the flour-dusted tops. Like cobblestones, river stones, soft water-licked pebbles, thick gravel crunching under her feet. She pushes a finger through the soft crust of a roll, digging down deep into its soft middle. That's what it's doing to her out there, punching through her head and thrusting its basalt self all through her, pulverizing her organs and liquefying her heart. The car whines and rattles as it slams in and out of the potholes, gears grinding as the company man navigates the curves. Eyes still shut, Ruth runs a fingertip over each lid, pressing in firm circles against the skin, feeling the hard jelly mounds roll back and forth at her touch until they ache. The landscape outside reforms itself as a negative against her lids, gnarled and blasted mountains rimmed in small explosions of sulfur yellow light. She can see it, almost the tip of it, pulsating with monstrous beauty in the distance, past the last high ridges of land. Someone else must have known, and that's why they named it so. A wild perversion of nature calling out through the everlasting sepulchre of night, seeking out and casting its blind gaze only upon her. The company wife is grabbing her arm. The car is stopped. Henry and the man are outside, fumbling with the smoking engine hood. Ruth rests her arm away from the woman's touch and opens the door. The rest of the caravan has passed them by, rounded the corner into the park. Ruth starts down the side of the road, slow, nonchalant, as if taking in a bit of air, as if she could. The air has bled out, and the only pounding static silence remains, filling her throat and lungs with its haddle-deep song. "I'm coming," she says to it. "I'm almost here." She hears the wife behind her and picks up her pace. "You gals don't wander too far," she hears the company man call out. "We should have this fixed in a jiffy." Ruth kicks her shoes off and runs. Behind her, the woman is calling out to the men. Ruth drops her purse. She runs like she used to when she was a kid, a freckled tomboy racing through the wheat fields of her father's farm in North Dakota. She runs like an animal, and now the land and the trees and the banks of the river are moving fast, slipping past her piston legs along with the long bend of the road. Her lungs are on fire, and her heart is all crazy and jumpy against her breasts, and tears streak into her mouth and nose, and it doesn't matter because she is so close, and it's called her with the hook of its song and pulling her, reeling her in, and Henry's hand is at the back of her neck. And there's gravel and the road smashing against her mouth and blood, and she's grinding away and kicking and clawing forward, and all she has to do is lift up her head just a little bit and keep her eyes shut, and she will finally see. Ruth's hands are clasped tight in her lap. Scum floats across the surface of an almost empty cup of coffee. A sob escapes her mouth, and she claps her hand over it, hitching as she pushes it back down. This small house, this small life, this cage. She can't do it anymore. The clock on the bookcase chimes 10. "I swear this is the last time," Ruth says, wiping the tears from her cheeks. The room is empty, but she knows who she's speaking to, and it knows too. "I know how to get to you. I know how to see you. This is the last goddamn day." On the kitchen table before her is the scrapbook, open to her favorite clipping. Ruth peels it carefully from the yellowing page and holds it to the light. Somewhere in the southern tropics, a pretty young woman in stained white linens lounging on a bench that encircles the impossibly thick trunk of a tree that has no beginning or end, whose roots plunge so far beyond the ends of the earth and time that somewhere in the vast cosmic oceans above, they loop and descend and transform into thick fronds and leaves that crown the woman's head with dappled shadow. All around the woman and the tree, drops of dried blood are spattered across the paper like the tears of a dying son. The woman's face lies behind one circle of deep brown, earth brown, wood brown, corpse brown. She's smiling, open-eyed, breathing it all in. Ruth balls the clipping up tight, and then places it in her mouth, chewing just a bit before she swallows. There is no other place the woman and the palm have been that they will ever be. Alone, apart, removed, untouched, all life here flows around them, utterly repelled. They cannot be bothered. It is of no concern to them. What cycle of life they are one with was not born in this universe. In the other room, Henry is getting dressed. If he's talking, she can't hear. Everywhere, black static rushes through the air. Strange equations and latitudes and lost languages and wondrous geometries, crammed into a silence so old and deep that all other sounds are made void. Ruth closes the scrapbook and stands, wiping the sweat from her palms on her Sunday dress. There is a large knife in the kitchen drawers and a small axe by the fireplace. She chooses the knife. She knows it better. She knows the heft of it in her hand when slicing into meat and bone. When she finally opens the door and steps into the small room, she's separating the rolls, the blade slipping back and forth through the powdery grooves. Ruth lifts one up to Henry and he takes it. It barely touches his mouth before she stabs him in the stomach, just above the belt, where nothing hard can halt its descent. He collapses and she falls with him, pulling the knife out and sitting on his chest as she plunges it into the center of his chest, twice because she isn't quite sure where his heart is. Then once at the base of his throat, blood like water gurgling over river stones, trickling away to a distant invisible sea that she can hear. Ruth wipes the blade on her dress as she rises, then places it on the table and picks up the basket and walks to the front door. She opens it a crack. "Henry's real sick," she says to the company man. "We're going to stay home today." She gives him the rolls, staring hard at the company wife in the back seat as she walks back to his car. The wife looks her over, confused. Ruth smiles and shuts the door. That bitch doesn't know a single thing. Ruth slips out the back through the window of their small bedroom. The caravan of cars is already headed toward the highway, following the Columbia downstream toward Beacon Rock. They'll never make it to the picnic. They'll never see it. They never do. She moves through the alley, past the last sad row of company houses, and into the tall evergreens that mark the end of North Bonneville. With each step into the forest, she feels the weight of the town fall away a little, and something vast and leviathan burrows deeper within, filling up the unoccupied space. When she's gone far and long enough that she no longer remembers her name, she stops and presses her fingers deep into the sockets, scooping her eyes out and pinching off the long ropes of flesh that follow them out of her body like sticky yarn. What rushes from her mouth might be screaming or it might be her soul, and it is smothered in the indifferent silence of the wild world. And now it sees, and it moves in the way it sees, floating and darting back and forth through the hidden phosphorescent folds of the lands within the land. Darkness punctured and coruscant with enamable colors and light, its dying flesh creeping and hitching through the forest, petrified by the absence of time. Just impenetrable ridges of mountains whose needle-sharp peaks cut whorls in the passing rivers of stars. A veil of flies hovers about the caves of its eyes and mouth, rising and falling with every rotting step, and bits of flesh scatter and sink to the earth, like barren seeds next to its pomegranate blood. If there is pain, it is beyond such narrow acknowledgement of its body. There is only the bright beacon of light and thunderous song, the sonorous ringing of the towering monolithic basalt breathing in and out, pushing the darkness away. There is, finally, past the curvature of the overgrown wild, a lush grass plain of emerald green, ripe and plump under a fat hot sun. A wide bench of polished wood and a palm tree pressing in a perfect arc against its small back, warm and worn and hard like ancient stone. When it looks up, it cannot see the tree's end. Its vision rises, black and wondrous, with the branches as timeless as it's both their dreams, past all the edges of all time, and this is the way it should be. Shepherd's Business by Stephen Gallagher. Picture me on an island supply boat, one of the old Clyde puffers seeking to deliver me to my new post. This was 1947, just a couple of years after the war, and I was a young doctor, relatively new to general practice. Picture also a choppy sea, a deck that rose and fell with every wave and a cross current, fighting hard to turn us away from the isle. Back on the mainland, I'd been advised that a hearty breakfast would be the best preventative for seasickness, and now, having loaded up with one, I was doing my best to hang on to it. I almost succeeded. Perversely, it was the sudden calm of the harbor that did it for me. I ran to the side, and I fear that I cast rather more than my bread upon the waters. Those on the quay were treated to a rare sight, the new doctor clinging to the ship's rail with seagulls swooping in the wake of the steamer for an unexpected waterborne treat. That is disgusting. The island's resident constable was awaiting for me at the end of the gangplank, a man of around my father's age, in uniform, chiseled in flint and unsullied by good cheer. He said, "Monroe Spence. Dr. Monroe Spence?" "That's me," I said. "Will you take a look at Dr. Lofton before we move him? He didn't have too good a journey down." There was a man to take care of my baggage, so I followed the constable to the harbor master's house at the end of the quay. It was a stone building, square and solid. Dr. Lofton was in the harbor master's sitting room behind the office. He was in a chair by the fire with his feet on a stool and rug over his knees, and was attended by one of his own nurses, a stocky, red-haired girl of 20 or younger. I began, "Dr. Lofton, I'm—" "My replacement, I know," he said. "Let's get this over with." I checked his pulse, felt his glands, listened to his chest, noted the signs of cyanosis. It was hardly necessary. Dr. Lofton had already diagnosed himself and had requested this transfer. He was an old-school Edinburgh-trained medical man, and I could be sure that his condition must be sufficiently serious that soldiering on was no longer an option. He might choose to ignore his own aches and troubles at a point, but as the island's only doctor, he couldn't leave the community at risk. When I inquired about chest pain, he didn't answer directly, but his expression told me all. "I wish you'd agree to an aeroplane," I said. "For my sake or yours," he said. "You think I'm bad? You should see your color." And then, relenting a little, "The airstrips for emergencies. What good's that to me?" I asked the nurse, "Will you be traveling with him?" "I will," she said. "I've an aunt I can stay with. I'll return on the morning boat." Two of the men from the puffer were waiting to carry the doctor to the quay. We moved back so that they could lift him between them, chair and all. As they were getting into position, Lofton said to me, "Try not to kill anyone in your first week, or they'll have me back here the day after." I was his locum, his temporary replacement. That was the story, but we both knew that he wouldn't be returning. His side of the island from the sea would almost certainly be his last. Once they'd maneuvered him through the doorway, the two sailors bore him with ease toward the boat. Some local people had turned out to wish him well on his journey. As I followed with the nurse beside me, I said, "Pardon me, but what do I call you?" "I'm Nurse Kirkwood," she said. "Rosie." "I'm Monroe," I said. "Is that an island accent, Rosie?" "You have a sharp ear, Dr. Spence," she said. She supervised the installation of Dr. Lofton in the deck cabin and didn't hesitate to give the men orders where another of her age and sex might only make suggestions or requests. A born matron, if ever I saw one. The old salts followed her instruction without a murmur. When they'd done the job to her satisfaction, Lofton said to me, "The latest patient files are on the desk. Your desk now." Nurse Kirkwood said to him, "You'll be back before they've missed you, Doctor," but he ignored that. He said, "These are good people. Look after them." The crew were already casting off, and they all but pulled the board from under my feet as I stepped ashore. I took a moment to gather myself and gave a pleasant nod in response to the curious looks of those well-wishers who'd stayed to see the boat leave. The day's cargo had been unloaded and stacked on the quay, and my bags were nowhere to be seen. I went in search of them and found Moody, driver and handyman to the island hospital, waiting beside a field ambulance that had been decommissioned from the military. He was chatting to another man who bade good day and moved off as I arrived. "Will it be much of a drive?" I said as we climbed aboard. Moody said. 10 minutes, an hour, half an hour." He agreed, making this one of the longest conversations we were ever to have. I think that's A-Y, not A. The drive took little more than 20 minutes. This was due to the size of the island and good concrete road, yet another legacy of the Army's wartime presence. We saw no other vehicles, slowed for nothing other than the occasional indifferent sheep, wool and weaving, along with some lobster fishing. Sustained in peacetime economy here. In wartime it had been different, with the local populace outnumbered by spotters, gunners, and the Royal Engineers. Later came a camp for Italian prisoners of war whose disused medical block, the Highlands and Islands Medical Service, took over when the island's cottage hospital burned down. Before we reached it, we passed the airstrip, still usable, but with its gatehouse and control tower abandoned. The former prisoners' hospital was a concrete building with a wooden barracks attached. The Italians had laid paths and a garden, but these were now growing wild. Again, I left Moody to deal with my bags and went looking to introduce myself to Senior Sister. Senior Sister Garson looked me over once and didn't seem too impressed, but she called me by my title and gave me a briefing on everyone's duties while leading me around on a tour. It was then that I learned my driver's name. I met all the staff apart from Mrs. Moody, who served as cook, housekeeper, and island midwife. "There's just the one 6-bed ward," Sister Garson told me. "We use that for the men and the officers' quarters for the women. 2 to a room." "How many patients at the moment?" "As of this morning, just one. Old John Pittry. He's come in to die." Harsh though it seemed, she delivered the information in a matter-of-fact manner. "I'll see him now," I said. Old John Petrie was 85 or 87. The records were unclear. Occupation, shepherd. Next of kin, none. A rarity on the island. He'd led a tough outdoor life, but toughness won't keep a body going forever. It was now grown so thin and frail that he was in danger of being swallowed up by his bedding. According to Dr. Lofton's notes, he'd presented with no specific ailment. One of my teachers might have diagnosed a case of TMB, too many birthdays. He'd been found in his croft house alone, half-starved, unable to rise. There was life in John Petrie's eyes as I introduced myself, but little sign of it anywhere else. We moved on. Mrs. Moody would bring me my evening meals, I was told, unless she was attending to a birth, in which case I'd be looked after by Rosie Kirkwood's mother, who'd cycle up from town. My experience in obstetrics had mainly involved being a student and staying out of midwife's way. Senior Sister Garson said, "They're mostly home births with a midwife attending, unless there are complications, and then she'll call you in, but that's quite rare. You might want to speak to Mrs. Tulloch before she goes home. Her baby was stillborn on Sunday." "Where do I find her?" I said. The answer was in the suite of rooms at the other end of the building. Her door in the women's wing was closed, with her husband waiting in the corridor. "She's dressing," he explained. Sister Garson said, "Thomas, this is Dr. Spence. He's taking over for Dr. Lofton." She left us together. Thomas Tulloch was a young man, somewhere around my age, but much hardier. He wore a shabby suit of all-weather tweed that looked as if it had outlasted several owners. His beard was dark, his eyes blue. Women like that kind of thing, I know, but my first thought was of a wall-eyed collie. What can I say? I like dogs. I asked him, "How's your wife bearing up?" "It's hard for me to tell," he said. "She hasn't spoken much," and then as soon as Sister Garson was out of earshot, he lowered his voice and said, "What was it?" "I beg your pardon?" "The child. Was it a boy or a girl?" "I have no idea. No one will say. Daisy didn't get to see it. It was just, your baby's dead. Get over it. You'll have another." "Her first?" He nodded. I wondered who might have offered such cold comfort. Everyone, I expect. It was the approach at the time. Infant mortality was no longer the commonplace event it once had been, but old attitudes lingered. I said, "And how do you feel?" Tulloch shrugged. "It's nature," he conceded. "But you'll get a ewe that won't leave a dead lamb. Is John Petrie dying now?" "I can't say. Why?" "I'm looking after his flock and his dog. His dog won't stay put." At that point, the door opened and Mrs. Tulloch, Daisy, stood before us. True to her name, a crushed flower. She was pale, fair, and small of stature, barely up to her husband's shoulder. She'd have heard our voices through the door, though not, I would hope, our conversation. I said, "Mrs. Tulloch, I'm Dr. Spence. Are you sure you're well enough to leave us?" She said, "Yes. Thank you, doctor." She spoke in a little above a whisper, though a grown and married woman from a distance you might have taken her for a girl of 16. I looked at Tulloch and said, "How will you get her home?" "We were told the ambulance," he said, and then, "or we could walk down for the mail bus." "Let me get Mr. Moody," I said. Moody seemed to be unaware of any arrangement and reluctant to comply with it, though it went against the grain to be firm with a man twice my age. I could see trouble in our future if I wasn't. I said, "I'm not discharging a woman in her condition to take a hike on the heath. To your ambulance, Mr. Moody." Garaged alongside the field ambulance, I saw a clapped-out Riley Roadster, at least a dozen years old. Lofton's own vehicle, available for my use. As the Tullocks climbed aboard the ambulance, I said to Daisy, "I'll call by and check on you in a day or two." And then to her husband, "I'll see if I can get an answer to your question." My predecessor's files awaited me in the office. Those covering his patients from the last 6 months had been left out on the desk, and were but the tip of the iceberg in time. I need to become familiar with the histories of everyone on the island, some 1,500 souls. It was a big responsibility for one medic, but civilian doctors were in short supply. Though the fighting was over and the forces demobbed, medical officers were among the last to be released. I dived in. The last winter had been particularly severe, with a number of pneumonia deaths and broken limbs from ice falls. I read of frostbitten fishermen and a 3-year-old boy deaf after measles. 2 cases had been sent to mainland for surgery, and 1 emergency appendectomy had been performed successfully and right here in the hospital's theater by Lofton himself. Clearly, I had a lot to live up to. Since October, there had been close to a dozen births on the island. A fertile community, and dependent upon it, most of the children were thriving. One family had moved away. A Mrs. Flett had popped out her 7th with no complications. But then there was Daisy Tulloch. I looked at her case notes. They were only days old and incomplete. Lofton had written them up in shaky hand, and I found myself wondering whether in some way his condition might have been a factor in the outcome. Not by any direct failing of his own, but Daisy had been 36 hours in labor before he was called in. Had the midwife delayed calling him for longer than she should? By the time of this intervention, it was a matter of no detectable heartbeat and a forceps delivery. I'd lost track of the time, so when Mrs. Moody appeared with a tray, I was taken by surprise. "Don't get up, doctor," she said. "I brought your tea." I turned the notes face down to the desk and pushed my chair back. Enough, I reckoned, for one day. I said, "The stillbirth, the tullux, was it a boy or a girl?" "Dr. Lofton dealt with it," Mrs. Moody said. "I wasn't there to see. It hardly matters now, does it?" "Stillbirths have to be registered," I said. "If you say so, doctor." "It's the law, Mrs. Moody. What happened to the remains?" "They're in the shelter for the undertaker. It's the coldest place we have. He'll collect them when there's next a funeral." I finished my meal and, leaving the tray for Mrs. Moody to clear, went out to the shelter. It wasn't just a matter of the Tulloch's curiosity. With no note of gender, I couldn't complete the necessary registration. Back then, the bodies of stillborn were often buried with any unrelated female adult. I had to act before the undertaker came to call. The shelter was an air raid bunker located between the hospital and the airfield, now used for storage. And when I say storage, I mean everything from our soap and toilet roll supply to the recently deceased. It was a series of chambers, mostly buried under a low grassy mound. The only visible features above ground were a roof vent and a brick-lined ramp leading down to a door at one end. The door had a mighty lock for which there was no key. Inside, I had to navigate my way through rooms filled with crates and boxes to find the designated mortuary with the slab, except that it wasn't a slab, it was a billiard table cast in the ubiquitous concrete by those Italians, no doubt, and repurposed by my predecessor. The cotton wrap package that lay on it was unlabeled and absurdly small. I picked the wrapping with difficulty and made the necessary check. A girl. The cord was still attached, and there were all the signs of a rough forceps delivery. Forceps in a live birth are only meant to guide and protect the child's head. The marks of force supported my suspicion that Lofton had been called to a point too late for the infant, and where he could only focus on preserving the mother's life. Night had all but fallen when I emerged, as I washed my hands before going to make a last check on our dying shepherd. I reflect on the custom of slipping a stillbirth into a coffin to share a stranger's funeral. On the one hand, it could seem like a heartless practice. On the other, there was something touching about the idea of a nameless child being placed in the anonymous care of another soul. Whenever I try to imagine eternity, it's always long and lonely. Such company might be a comfort for both. Jean-Pierre lay with his face toward the darkened window. In the time since I first visited, he'd been washed and fed and the bed remade around him. I said, "Mr. Petrie, do you remember me, Dr. Spence?" There was a slight change in the rhythm of his breathing, and I took for a yes. I said, "Are you comfortable?" Nothing moved but his eyes looking at me, then back at the window. "What about pain? Have you any pain I can help with if you have?" Nothing, so then I said, "Let me close these blinds for you," but as I moved, he made a sound. "Don't close them," I said. "Are you sure?" I followed his gaze. I could see the shelter mound from here. Only the vague shape of the hill was visible at this hour. One layer of deepening darkness over another. Against the sky and the last of the fading light, I could make out the outline of an animal. It was a dog, and it seemed to be watching the building. I did as John Petrie wished, left the blinds open, and him to the night. My accommodation was in the wooden barracks where the prisoners had lived and slept. I had an oil lamp for light and a ratty curtain at the window. My bags had been lined up at the end of the creaky bunk. The one concession to luxury was a rag rug on the floor. I could unpack in the morning. I undressed, dropped onto the bed, and had the best sleep of my life. With the morning came my first taste of practice routine, an early ward round, such as it was, and then a drive down into town for weekday surgery. This took place in a room attached to the library, and ran on a system of first come, first serve for as long as it took to deal with the queue. All went without much of a hitch. No doubt some people stayed away out of the wariness over a new doctor. Others had discovered minor ailments with which to justify their curiosity. Before surgery was over, Rosie Kirkwood joined me fresh from the boat. Dr. Lofton had not enjoyed the voyage, she told me, and left it at that. After the last patient, Chilblains, had left, Nurse Kirkwood said, "I see you have use of Dr. Lofton's car. Can I beg a lift back to the hospital?" "You can," I said. "And along the way, can you show me where the Tullocks live? I'd like to drop by." She said, "I can show you the way, but it's not the kind of place you can just drop by." I will not claim that I'd mastered the Riley. When I described it as clapped out, I did not exaggerate. The engine sounded like a keg of bottles rolling down a hill, and the springs gave us a ride like a condemned fairground. Rosie seemed used to it. Passing through town with the harbor behind us, I said, "Which one's the undertaker?" "We just passed it." "The furniture place?" "Donald Budge, my father's cousin, also the coroner and cabinet maker to the island." 2 minutes later, we were out of town. It was bleak, rolling lowland moor in every direction, stretching out to a big, big sky. Raising my voice to be heard over the whistling crack in the windshield, I said, "You've lived here all your life?" "I have," she said. "I saw everything change with the war. We thought it would go back to being the same again after, but that doesn't happen, does it?" "Never in the way you expect," I said. "Dr. Lofton won't be coming back, will he?" "There's always hope." That's what we say to patients. I took my eyes off the road for a moment to look at her. She said, "You can speak plainly to me, doctor. I don't do my nursing for a hobby, and I don't always plan to be doing it here." And then, with barely a change in tone, "There's a junction with a telephone box coming up." I quickly returned my attention to the way ahead. Do I turn? Not there. The next track just after. It was a rough track, and the word bone-shaking wouldn't begin to describe it. Now I understood why the Riley was falling apart. If this was the pattern for every home visit. The track ran for most of a mile and finally became completely impassable, with still a couple of 100 yards to go to reach the Tullocks' home. Their house was a one-story crofter's cottage with a sod roof and a barn attached. The cottage walls were lime-washed. Those of the barn were of bare stone. I took my medical bag from the car and we walked the rest of the way. When we reached the door, Nurse Kirkwood knocked and called out, "Daisy, it's the doctor to see you." There was movement within. As we waited, I looked around. Painters romanticized these places. All I saw was evidence of a hard living. I also saw a dog tethered some yards from the house looking soulful. It resembled the one I'd seen the night before, although, to be honest, the same could be said of every dog on the island. After making us wait as long as she dared for a quick tidy of the room and herself, Daisy Tulloch opened the door and invited us in. She was wearing a floral print dress, and her hair had been hastily pinned. She offered tea. Nurse Kirkwood insisted on making it as we talked, although Daisy rose to the occasion with the necessary courtesy. I could see it was a struggle. The experience of the last week had clearly hit her hard. "I don't want to cause any fuss, doctor," was all she would say. "I'm tired, that's all." People respect a doctor, but they'll talk to a nurse. When I heard sheep and more than one dog barking outside, I went out and left the two women conferring. Tulloch was herding a couple of dozen ewes into a muddy pen by the cottage. A mixed herd, if the markings were anything to go by. Today we wore a cloth cap and blue work pants with braces. I realized that the tweeds I'd taken from his working clothes were actually his Sunday best. I waited until the sheep were all pinned, and then went over. I told him it would have been a girl, but then I left it there, because what more could I add? But then I thought occurred, and I said, "You may want to keep the information to yourself. Why make things worse?" That's what Dr. Lofton said. Chin up, move on, have yourself another, but she won't see it like that. I watched him go to the barn and return with a bucket of okra in one hand and a stick in the other. The stick had a crusty rag wrapped around its end for dipping and marking the fleeces. I said, "Are those John Petrie sheep?" "They are," he said, "but someone's got to dip 'em and clip 'em. Will he ever come back?" "There's always hope," I said. "What about his dog?" He glanced at the tethered animal, watching us from over near the house. "Biddy," he said, "that dog's no use to me. Next time she runs off, she's gone. I'm not fetching her home again." "A dog," Nurse Kirkwood said. She braced herself against the dash as we bumped our way back onto the road. "Senior Sister Garson will love you." "I'll keep her in the barracks," I said. "Senior Sister Garson doesn't even need to know." She turned around to look at Biddy, seated in the open luggage hatch. The collie had her face tilted up into the wind and her eyes closed in an attitude of uncomplicated bliss. "Good luck with that," she said. That night, when the coast was clear, I sneaked Beatty into the ward. "John," I said, "you've got a visitor." I began to find my way around. I started to make home visits and took the time to meet the island's luminaries, from the priest to the postman to the secretary of the Grays Committee. Most of the time, Biddy rode around with me in the back of the Riley. One night I went down into town and took the dog into the pub with me as an icebreaker. People were beginning to recognize me now. It would be a while before I'd feel accepted, but I felt I had made a start. Senior Sister Garwood told me that Donald Budge, the undertaker, had now removed the infant body for an appropriate burial. She also said that he'd complained to her about the state in which he'd found it. I told her to send them to me, and I'd explain the medical realities of the situation to a man who ought to know better. Budge didn't follow it up. The next day in town, Thomas Tulloch came to the morning surgery alone. "Mr. Tulloch," I said, "how can I help you?" "It's not for me," he said. "It's Daisy, but she won't come. Can you give her a tonic, anything that'll perk her up? Nothing to do seems to help." "Give her time. It's only been a few days." "It's getting worse. Now she won't leave the cottage. I try to persuade her to visit her sister, but she just turns to the wall." So I wrote him a script for some parishes, a harmless red concoction of sweetened iron phosphate that would at best sharpen the appetite, and at worst do nothing at all. It was all I could offer. Depression in those days was a condition to be overcome by pulling oneself together. Not to do so was to be perverse and most likely attention-seeking, especially if you were a woman. I couldn't help thinking that, though barely educated even by the island standards, Tulloch was an unusually considerate spouse for his time. Visits from the dog seemed to do the trick for John Petrie. I may have thought I was deceiving the senior sister, but I realized now that she was most likely turning a blind eye. Afterwards, his breathing was always easier, his sleep more peaceful, and I even got my first words out of him when he beckoned me close and said into my ear, "You'll do." After this mark of approval, I looked up to find the constable waiting for me, hat in his hands as if he were unsure of the protocol. Was a dying man's bedside supposed to be like a church? He was taking no chances. He said, "I'm sorry to come and find you at your work, doctor, but I hope you can settle a concern." "I can try." "There's a rumor going around about the dead Tulloch baby. Some kind of abuse?" "I don't understand." "Some people are even saying it had been skinned." "Skinned?" I echoed. "I've seen what goes on in postmortems and such," the constable persisted, "but I never heard of such a thing being called for." "Nor have I said. "It's just Chinese whispers, David. I saw the body before Donald Budge took it away. It was in poor condition after a long and difficult labor, but the only abuse it suffered was natural. I'm only going by what people are saying." "Well, for God's sake, don't let them say such a thing around the mother." "I do hear she's taken it hard," the constable conceded. "Same thing happened to my sister, but she just got on. I've never even heard her speak of it." He looked to me for permission and then went around the bed to address John Petrie. He bent down with his hands on his knees and spoke as if to a child or an imbecile. "All right, John," he said. "Back on your feet soon, eh?" Skinned. Who ever heard of such a thing? The chain of gossip must have started with Donald Budge and grown even more grotesque in the telling. According to the records, Budge had 4 children of his own. The entire family was active in amateur dramatics and the church choir. You'd expect a man in his position to know better. I was writing up patient notes at the end of the next day's town surgery when there was some commotion outside. Nurse Kirkwood went to find out the cause and came back. Hold on. What the heck just happened? Okay, that was weird. And came back moments later with a breathless 9-year-old boy at her side. "This is Robert Flett," she said. "He ran all the way here to say his mother's been in an accident." "What kind of accident?" The boy looked startled and dumbstruck at my direct question, but Rosie Kirkwood spoke for him. "He says she fell." I looked at her. "You know the way?" "Of course." We all piled into the Riley to drive out to the west of the island. Nurse Kirkwood sat beside me, and I lifted Robert into the bag hatch with the dog, where both seemed happy enough. At the highest point on the moor, Nurse Kirkwood reckoned she spotted a walking figure on a distant path far from the road. She said, "Is that Thomas Tulloch? What could he be doing out here?" But I couldn't spare the attention to look. Adam Flett was one of 3 brothers who together were the island's most prosperous crofter family. In addition to their livestock and rented lands, they made some regular money from government contract work. With a tenancy protected by law, Adam had built a 2-story home with a slate roof and laid a decent road to it. I was able to drive almost to the door. Sheep scattered as I braked, and the boy jumped out to join with other children in gathering them back with sticks. It was only a few weeks since Jen Flett had borne the youngest of her 7 children. The birth had been trouble-free, but the news of a fall concerned me. Her eldest, a girl of around 12 years, led us into the house. I looked back and saw Adam Flett on the far side of the yard watching us. Jean Flett was lying on a well-worn old sofa and struggled to rise as we came through the door. I could see that she hadn't been expecting us. Despite the size of their family, she was only in her 30s. I said, "Mrs. Flett," and Nurse Kirkwood stepped past me to steady our patient and ease her back onto the couch. "This is Dr. Spence," Nurse Kirkwood explained. "I told Marion," Jean Flett protested. "I told her not to send for you." "Well, now that I'm here," he said, "let's make sure my journey isn't wasted. Can you tell me what happened?" She wouldn't look at me and gave a dismissive wave. "I fell, that's all." "Where's the pain?" "I'm just winded." I took her pulse and then got her to point out where it hurt. She winced when I checked her abdomen and again when I felt around her neck. I said, "Did you have these marks before the fall?" It was a shock. I don't remember. Tenderness around the abdomen, a raised heart rate, left side pain, and what appeared to be days-old bruises. I exchanged a glance with Nurse Kirkwood. A fair guess would be that the new mother had been held against the wall and punched. I said, "We need to move you to the hospital for a couple of days." "No," she said. "I'm just sore. I'll be fine." "You've bruised your spleen, Mrs. Flett. I don't think it's ruptured, but I need to be sure. Otherwise, you could need emergency surgery." "Oh, no." "I want you where we can keep an eye on you. Nurse Kirkwood, can you help her pack a bag?" I went outside. Adam Flett had moved closer to the house, but was still hovering. I said to him, "She's quite badly hurt. That must have been some fall." "She says it's nothing." He wanted to believe it, but he'd seen her pain, and I think it scared him. I said, "With an internal injury, she could die. I'm serious, Mr. Flett. I'll get the ambulance down to collect her." I thought that Nurse Kirkwood was still inside the house, so when she spoke from just behind me, I was taken by surprise. She said, "Where's the baby, Mr. Flett?" "Sleeping," he said. "Where?" she said. "I want to see." "It's no business of yours or anyone else's." Her anger was growing, and so was Flett's defiance. "What have you done to it?" she persisted. "The whole island knows it isn't yours. Did you get rid of it? Is that what argument was about? Is that why you struck your wife?" I was aware of 3 or 4 of his children now standing at a distance watching us. "The Flett brothers have a reputation, Doctor," she said, lowering her voice so the children wouldn't hear. "It wouldn't be the first time another man's child had been taken out to the barn and drowned in a bucket." He tried to lunge at her then, and I had to step in. "Stop that," I said, and he shook me off and backed away. He started pacing like an aggrieved wrestler whose opponent stands behind the referee. Meanwhile, his challenger was showing no fear. "Well," Rosie Kirkwood said. "You've got it wrong," he said. "You don't know anything. I won't leave until you prove the child's safe." And I said, "Wait," because I'd had a sudden moment of insight and reckoned I knew what must have happened. I said, "Rosie, he sold the baby to Thomas Tulloch in exchange for John Petrie's sheep. I recognize those marks. I watched Tulloch make them." I looked at Flett. "Am I right?" Flett said nothing right away, and then he said, "They're Petrie's?" "I suppose Thomas drove them over," I said. "Nurse Kirkwood spotted him heading back on the moor. Is the baby with him?" Flett only shrugged. "I don't care whether the rumors are true," I said. "You can't take a child from its mother. I'll have to report this." "Do what you like," Flett said. "It was her idea," and he walked away. I couldn't put Jean Flett in the Riley, but nor did I want to leave her unattended as I brought in the ambulance. "I'll stay," Nurse Kirkwood said. "I'll come to no harm here." On the Army Highway, I stopped at the Moreland Crossroads, calling ahead for the telephone box to get the ambulance on its way. It passed me heading in the opposite direction before I reached the hospital. There I made arrangements to receive Mrs. Flett. My concern was with her injury, not her private life. Lord knows how a crofter's wife with sick children found the time, the opportunity, or the energy for a passion, however brief. I'll leave it to your H.E. Bateses and D.H. Lawrences to explore that one, with their greater gifts than mine. Her general health seemed, like so many of her island breed, to be robust, but a bruised spleen needs rest in order to heal, and any greater damage could take a day or 2 to show. Biddy followed at my heels as I picked up a chair and went to sit by John Petrie. He had rallied a little with the dog's visits, though the prognosis was unchanged. I opened the window 18 inches or so. Biddy could be out of there like a shot if we should hear the senior sister coming. "I know I can be straight with you, John," I said. "How do you feel about your legacy, giving a future to an unwanted child?" They were his sheep that had been traded, after all. and Jean Flett had confirmed her wish to see her child raised where it wouldn't be resented. As for Daisy's feelings, I tried to explain them to Tulloch's own analogy of a ewe unwilling to leave its dead lamb, which I was sure he'd understand. John Petrie listened and then beckoned me closer. What he whispered then had me running to the car. I had no way of saying whether Thomas Tulloch might have reached his cottage yet. My sense of local geography wasn't that good. I didn't even know for sure that he was carrying the Flett baby. I pushed the Riley as fast as it would go, and when I left the road for the bumpy lane, I hardly slowed. How I didn't break the car in two or lose a wheel, I do not know. I was tossed and bucketed around, but I stayed on the track until the car could progress no further, and then I abandoned it and set myself to fly as best I could the rest of the way. I saw Tulloch from the crest of a rise at the same time as the cottage came into view. I might yet reach him before he made it home. He was carrying a bundle close to his chest. I shouted, but either he didn't hear me or he ignored my call. I had to stop him before he got to Daisy. It was shepherd's business. In the few words he could manage, John Petrie had told me how, when a newborn lamb is rejected by its mother, it could be given to a ewe whose own lamb has died at birth. But first the shepherd must skin the dead lamb and pull its pelt over the living one. Then the new mother might accept it as her own. If the sheep understood, the horror would be overwhelming. But animals aren't people. I didn't believe what I was thinking, but what if? I saw the crofter open his door and go inside with his bundle. I was only a few strides behind him, but those scant moments were enough. When last I'd seen Daisy Tulloch, she'd the air of a woman in whom nothing could hope to rouse the spirit perhaps ever again. But the screaming started from within the house, just as I was reaching the threshold. Down to a Sunless Sea by Neil Gaiman. The Thames is a filthy beast that winds through London like a snake or a sea serpent. All the rivers flow into it, the Fleet and the Tyburn and the Neckinger, carrying all the filth and scum and waste, the bodies of cats and dogs and the bones of sheep and pigs down into the brown water of the Thames, which carries them east into the estuary, and from there into the North Sea and oblivion. It is raining in London. The rain washes the dirt into the gutters, and it swells streams into rivers, rivers into powerful things. The rain is a noisy thing, splashing and pattering and rattling the rooftops. If it is clean water as it falls from the skies, it only needs to touch London to become dirt, to stir dust and make it mud. Nobody drinks it, neither the rain water nor the river water. They make jokes about Thames water killing you instantly, and it is not true. There are mudlarks who will dive deep for thrown pennies, then come up again, spout the river water, shiver, and hold up their coins. They do not die, of course, or not of that, although there are no mudlarks over 15 years of age. The woman does not appear to care about the rain. She walks the Rotherhithe docks as she has done for years, for decades. Nobody knows how many years, because nobody cares. She walks the docks, or she stares out at the sea. She examines the ships as they bob at anchor. She must do something to keep body and soul from dissolving their partnership, but none of the folk of the dock have the foggiest idea what this could be. You take refuge from the deluge beneath a canvas awning, put it up by a sailmaker. You believe yourself to be alone under there at first, for she is statue still and staring out across the water, even though there's nothing to be seen through the curtain of rain. The far side of the Thames has vanished. And then she sees you. She sees you and she begins to talk, not to you, oh no, but to the gray water that falls from the gray sky into the gray river. She says, "My son wanted to be a sailor, and you do not know which to reply or how to reply. You would have to shout to make yourself heard over the roar of the rain, but she talks and you listen. You discover yourself craning and straining to catch her words. I don't know where it went. Hold on. Okay. My son wanted to be a sailor. I told him not to go to sea. I'm your mother, I said. The sea won't love you like I love you. She's cruel. But he said, oh, mother, I need to see the world. I need to see the sunrise in the tropics and watch the northern lights dance in the Arctic sky. And most of all, I need to make my fortune, and then, when it's made, I will come back to you and build you a house. And you will have servants, and we will dance, mother. Oh, how we will dance. And what would I do in a fancy house, I told him. You're a fool with your fine talk, I told him, of his father, who never came back from the sea. Some said he was dead and lost overboard, while some swore blind they'd seen him running a whorehouse in Amsterdam. It's all the same. The sea took him. When he was 12 years old, my boy ran away, down to the docks, and he shipped on the first ship he found. To Flores in the Azores, they told me. They're ships of ill omen, bad ships. They give them a lick of paint after each disaster and a new name to foul the unwary. Sailors are superstitious. The word gets around. This ship has run aground by its captain on orders of the owners to defraud the insurers, and then, all mended and as good as new, it gets taken by pirates, and then it takes shipment of blankets and becomes a plague ship crewed by the dead, and only 3 men bring it into port in Harwick. My son had shipped on a storm crow's ship that was on the homeward leg of the journey, with him bringing me his wages, for he was too young to have spent them on a woman or on grog like his father, that the storm hit. He was the smallest one in the lifeboat. They said they drew lots fairly, but I do not believe it. He was smaller than them. After 8 days adrift in the boat, they were so hungry, and if they did draw lots, they cheated. They gnawed his bones clean one by one, and they gave them to his new mother, the sea. She shed no tears and took them without a word. She's cruel. Some nights I wish he had not told me the truth. He could have lied. They gave my boy's bones to the sea, but the ship's mate, who had known my husband, and known me too, better than my husband thought he did, if truth were told, he kept a bone as a keepsake. When they got back to land, all of them swearing my boy was lost in the storm that sank the ship, he came in the night, and he told me the truth of it, and he gave me the bone, for the love there had once been between us. I said, you've done a bad thing, Jack. That was your son that you've eaten. The sea took him too that night. He walked into her with his pockets filled with stones, and he kept walking. He'd never learned to swim. And I put the bone on a chain to remember them both by, late at night, when the wind crashes the ocean waves and tumbles them on to the sand, when the wind howls around the houses like a baby crying. The rain is easing, and you think she's done, but now for the first time she looks at you and appears to be about to say something. She has pulled something from around her neck, and now she is reaching it out to you. Here, she says. Her eyes, when they meet yours, are as brown as the Thames. Would you like to touch it? You want to pull it from her neck, to toss it into the river, for the mudlarks to find or to lose, but instead you stumble out from under the canvas awning, and the water of the rain runs down your face like someone else's tears. The Man from the Peak by Adam Gulaski. The sun left tatters and shades of red across the sky, tatters that shriveled through purple indigo to black. The stars didn't come out, instead, oil-gray clouds. I kept the car going up, steering around the worst ruts and rocks in the road. I drove under the no trespassing sign, kept driving up. The forest around me was thick, the leaves had come in, hardy and wet, spring. I wondered if this would be the last time I'd make the drive up to Richards. I thought so. Richard was leaving, moving east, so a farewell bash. Sarah would be there too. With a sound like marbles clicking or teeth, the wine bottle and the whiskey bottle on the passenger seat bumped against each other. Richard's house stood on the shadows of the mountain's peak. I turned off the car and sat, let my eyes adjust to the darkness, listened to cooling engine skitter. The walk to Richard's was lined with paper lanterns, no doubt Sarah's touch. I grabbed the bottles, set them on the roof of the car, lit a cigarette, and looked up the peak. I heard people talking, some of the voices outside from the hot tub, no doubt, and muted voices from the house. There were a dozen cars parked in front of my own. I opened the back door of the car and took out a small package. A book for Sarah, a collection of short stories she and I had talked about the last time the three of us, Richard, Sarah, and I, had been together. I tucked the book under my arm, took the bottles, and walked up to the house. I rang the bell, and a woman wearing a bikini opened the door. She looked at me up and down as if I were wearing a bikini, laughed a little, and brushed past me. As she passed, she asked, "Did you bring your suit?" The house was long and narrow. To my left was the guest room, to my right a kitchen and a television room/bar. Michael, an old friend of Richard's, who I'd come to like, was busy mixing drinks. He'd explained to me once that he took up the role of bartender at parties so he could get to know all the women. I approached the bar and said, "I'd say the hot tub is where you want to be tonight." Michael nodded ruefully. I handed Michael the bottles I'd brought. "Good stuff," he said. "Good to see you," he said. I shook his hand and patted his shoulder. "What do you have?" he asked. "A glass of that whiskey," I said. He said, "Try this instead," and poured from an already open bottle. I put my cigarette out in a red glass ashtray by the bar and had a sip. I nodded my appreciation. "I should announce myself," I said, and backed away. The living room, a large open space dominated by a fat couch and a grand piano. Richard didn't play. Sarah was on the couch drinking wine. When she saw me, she stood, crossed the room with a quick, woozy stride, and put her arms around me. "Watch the wine," I said. She stepped back from me, a wounded expression on her face. I took her glass and rested it on the piano. She put her arms around me again and said, "I got so excited when you come. I always do. It's so silly. I always am so excited to see you." "It's good to see you too." We kissed, as we did whenever we saw each other. I'm not sure how this greeting got started, but our kisses were long and on the lips. She'd been dating Richard as long as I'd known her. "Have you seen Richard yet?" she asked. "I just got here." "Can I?" She tapped the cigarette box in my breast pocket. She slipped her fingers into the pocket and smiled at me. "You always have the best cigarettes." As she lit up, she eyed the wrapped package under my arm. "It's for you," I said. She unwrapped my gift, dropped the brown paper to the floor. "You found a copy," she said. She opened the book, careful with the spine. A delicate touch on the yellow edge of each page she turned over. "You're the only one who ever gets me books." She tapped her necklace, an elegant, expensive silver knot. "Richard always buys me jewelry," she said with a frown. We caught up a little about Richard's preparations for leaving, though we skirted the issue of whether or not she'd be going. We would have the conversation later. I needed to drink a little more to meet everyone. I looked past Sarah at the woman on the couch. Sarah said, "That one's Camellia. She's a stunning boar, and that's Cat. Fun, fun, fun. They're friends of Richard's. From where, I do not know. Come, I need more wine." We left her glass on the piano, made our way up to the bar. She fell into a conversation with Michael. I walked off. I didn't feel like standing around while Sarah and Michael talked. Richard was in the yard, beer in hand, talking with someone I didn't know. Just behind him was the hot tub. The woman who'd answered the door was in the tub with a couple of guys. Before Richard spotted me, the woman said, "You should come in. It's perfect. Cold outside, warm in here." She giggled. One of the guys leaned over and whispered to her, and she pushed him away. "David, you made it," Richard said. "I wouldn't miss it." "Well, I'm glad, you know." He introduced me to his friend and to the guys in the tub. He didn't know the woman's name, and she didn't supply it. "Come on and sit," he said to me. I sat on a cooler. Richard and his friend were talking about Boston, where Richard was moving. I'd never been to Boston, I told them, though I'd heard it was like San Francisco. We talked about San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. The woman in the hot tub interrupted us and asked me to get her a beer. I got up to get a beer from the cooler. She stood. She was very thin, no hips, but gifted with significant breasts. She leaned forward, bent at the waist without bending her knees, and brought her bosom to my face. Freckles swirled into the dark line of her cleavage. "Thank you so much," she said, and took the beer. The guys in the tub were happily gazing at her tiny bottom. Those men were nothing to her, made to carry her bags and perform rudimentary tasks while she gazed off in other, more interesting directions. I'd met women like her many times before. "My name's Prudence," she said. "Of course it is," I said. "You really ought to join." "You know, I'm not going to." She did know, too, and smiled a wide, long smile. "But I'll be here all night," I said. She settled back into her pool. I lit a cigarette for a moment, a flame cupped in my hand. I drew my hand away and looked up to the peak. A man, briefly illuminated by moonlight before the clouds closed up, appeared at the top, moved toward the house. I said to Richard, "Does someone live up there?" Richard told me he didn't think so. I tried to point out the man, who I could still see as a dark shape on a dark background, but Richard couldn't find him. "I'm going to go in, get a real drink," I said. Richard said he'd go in shortly. I shrugged and walked around to the front of the house, an eye on the man walking down the mountain. Most of the people at Richard's party weren't attractive. They might be fit, and many were dressed in expensive clothes, but most of his friends looked average, and upon getting to know them were. The exceptions were notable. Michael, a transplant from the coast, a man of style. Kat and Carmilla, just beautiful. Prudence, a manipulator. I appreciated, and Sarah. Kat and Carmilla were seated on a small couch in the guest room, surrounded by 4 or 5 guys and one unfortunate-looking girl. Pasty, a large flat nose, and her force into a strange shade of red. They were all watching a movie. Kat spotted me in the doorway, shifted on the couch, shoved at one of the guys, and gestured for me to sit beside her. They were watching The Man Who Fell to Earth, that beautiful David Bowie film. I let myself get drawn into the movie. Kat ran her hand in a circle on my back. When the unfortunate girl sneezed, breaking my mood, I excused myself and walked down the hall to the bar. I passed the front door just as there was a knock. The door was answered and I heard, "What? You need a formal invitation?" "Sure, come on in. You are welcome to come in." Sarah joined me at the bar and took my arm. We collected drinks, and Michael and I went out onto the patio. Mercifully, the 3 of us were there alone. Sarah stole a cigarette and complained about Richard's friends. Present company excluded. Michael then brought up the subject Sarah and I had danced around once already. "What's in Boston for you? I mean, I know Richard has a great job, but what are you going to do?" Sarah looked at the floor for a moment, took a drag and a drink, and said, "That's just the thing, Michael." I was eager to hear her explain to Michael just what that thing was. I thought I knew, but I wanted her to say it. But instead, she stared past Michael, back into the house. I turned and Michael turned, and we all watched a very ugly man walk past the back patio door toward the bar. "Who the hell was that?" I asked. Sarah said, "I don't know, but," and then drifted past me into the hall. Michael and I looked at each other, then followed. I dropped my cigarette on the patio floor. The ugly man wasn't at the bar by the time we stepped into the hall. No one was. He was in the living room behind the piano playing Adagio from Moonlight Sonata on Richard's out-of-tune grand. The result was not lulling or melancholic, as the Adagio is, but dissonant and eerie. No one else seemed to share my evaluation of the music. Everyone, the whole party except Prudence and her men, were gathered around the piano watching the ugly man play, laughing when he made an exaggerated flourish over the keyboard, but rapt, totally caught up, so that they all jumped when he moved into the more upbeat allegretto. I wanted to jump too, each out-of-tune note grated on my nerves. I stared at the ugly man as he played. He was bald, his head was long and bony, his eyes lost in shadow, his skin was a dark brown, not like Michael's, no. He didn't look African. The ugly man was black, all right, but his skin was waxy and all over there was a patina of green, the green of rotten beef. I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to touch his skin. My finger, I was sure, would sink in, as it would in a pool of congealed fat. His ears were large and pointed, his mouth was small, pursed as he played, and his teeth were too large for his tiny mouth. His two front teeth were the worst, jagged, yellow buck teeth. I was greatly relieved to see that Sarah did not appear to be under his spell. She stood in the corner watching, not the ugly man but the crowd, and Richard, who stood with a stupid open-mouth expression on his face, clapping like a little girl every time the ugly man crossed his hands over the keyboard. I could hear, barely audible, David Bowie's voice in the guest room. The ugly man stopped playing the piano then, and it dawned on me that he must be the man I'd seen coming down from the peak. He waved his hands in the air, and this seemed to release everyone. There was some applause, and people returned to what they had been doing. I watched Kat and Camilla walk back toward the guest room. Michael made a beeline for the bar, and Sarah and Richard walked over to me. I noticed the Patsy girl with the bad dye job standing next to the ugly man, looking down at him as he caressed her hand. The perfect couple, I thought. I led Sarah and Richard to the bar and instead insisted that Michael open the whiskey I'd brought, a far better whiskey than what he'd served me when I'd arrived. I asked who the ugly man was. She said she didn't know. Michael and Richard acted as if I hadn't asked the question. I put my hand on Richard's arm and asked again, and he said, "Which ugly man?" I took Richard's response to be a joke and gave him a forced, weak chuckle. My whiskey was a relief. I needed a moment alone with Sarah. I wanted her to have a chance to finish what she had been saying earlier. I wanted her to tell me that there was nothing for her in Boston, that she had no intention of ever joining Richard in Boston and was only pretending so as not to break his heart before his big trip. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I was certain it was the ugly man's. I was surprised, relieved that the hand belonged to Prudence. "I'm out of the tub," she whispered. Sarah and Richard were talking. I asked Prudence what she wanted to drink, and she held up a beer. "I'm all set in that department. Did you know they're watching a movie in the guest room?" "Yes," I said. I followed Prudence down the hall. She'd put on a dress over her wetsuit, somehow with the bands of wet, clinging material around her waist and her chest. She seemed more naked than she had before. I'd catch up with Sarah later, catch her when Richard was off chatting up one of his boring friends. Prudence and I entered the room. The man who fell to earth was still on. Had Bowie yet revealed his alien identity? Kat and Carmilla were on the couch, and to my satisfaction, Kat shot Prudence a nasty look and beckoned me to a spot beside her. Prudence, first in the guest room, took that spot. Small as her hips were, there was no more room left on the couch. When she saw this, she slid off the couch onto the floor and offered me the spot Kat had already offered. Regardless of the outcome of my conversation with Sarah, I knew I would not leave the party alone. I considered even the possibility that Prudence and Kat's attentions would prove useful in gaining Sarah's attention. Kat stroked my hair, Prudence my leg. The other men in the room couldn't help but glance away from the television to look first at the women, then at me, wishing themselves in my position. Just before the movie ended, a sad, pale scene. I'd been lulled by all the petting. The ugly man, the man from the peak, walked past the guest room. I caught a glimpse of him just as he walked out of sight. Except for Prudence, the people in the guest room left. The guys, Carmilla, and Kat, before I could dwell on this much. Prudence was on the couch beside me, hand on the inside of my thigh, mouth drifting toward my face. I knew that face, drifting sleepily. A drunk woman about to kiss me. I let her kiss me. We kissed. Her tongue darted in and out of my own mouth. Her open hand pressed against my erection. My hand on the damp cloth covering her right breast. My hand on the damp cloth at the small of her back. I broke off are kissing. I said, let's get something more to drink. Though she gave me a petulant look, I knew she would do as I asked, and I thought for a moment, this woman actually knows what I'm doing, understands, would have ended the kiss herself shortly if I hadn't. In that moment, I preferred Prudence to Sarah. The moment was fleeting. The ugly man had been speaking, addressing the entire party, it seemed. When Prudence and I stepped into the living room, he waved his hand as he'd done before, and the crowd dispersed as it had before. Everyone left the room except for one person, one of the guys who'd been in the hot tub with Prudence. I watched her watch him talk to the ugly man, and Prudence said, I knew he was gay. I wasn't sure who she was referring to at first. I didn't think the ugly man was gay, and then I realized who she meant. Who is that man? I asked. I don't know. I've been outside all night. Didn't you see him come down from the peak? From the peak? There's nothing up there. I'm going to get another drink. She left. I lit a cigarette and went out onto the patio. Richard and Sarah were out there, though Richard was talking with one of his friends and Sarah was just standing around looking bored. She brightened when she saw me. I gave her a cigarette. Why don't we go outside a while? Sarah said. We left the enclosed patio. We heard voices coming from the direction of the hot tub. We walked out into the backyard, toward the woods. What was that guy talking about? I asked. Which guy? The ugly guy, the guy with the buck teeth. Sarah turned up a confused expression. When she pulled on her cigarette, her face was illuminated. She had, I thought, the most perfect face. Between her eyebrows, just above the bridge of her nose, was a circular patch of skin very smooth and brighter white than the rest of her face. I wanted to put my fingertip on that spot. I did. She scrunched her face up and giggled, brushing my finger away. So that's what that button does, I said. So, I said, you didn't finish what you were saying earlier. She didn't answer me but pointed, and I forgot what I'd asked when I saw what she was pointing out. The man from the peak walked across the lawn on a line parallel with our own course, maybe 20 feet away, with the guy he'd been talking to in the living room. They walked toward the edge of the wood, where a woman, the woman with the bad dye job, lay on the ground. What is going on over there? Sarah asked. I said, I'm sure we don't want to know. Do you think she's all right? She looks fine to me, I said, though there was no way I could actually judge from where we stood. We should leave them be, I said, but I asked, who is that guy anyhow? I saw him come down from the peak. Which guy? Sarah asked. The bald guy. Right when I said that, he was out of sight. He'd stepped into the shadow that made him all but invisible, so I said, never mind. On the patio, we finished our drinks. Sarah took another cigarette. She looked around. There were other guests on the patio, but none we knew more than just in passing. Richard had gone inside. Sarah said, I'm not putting any pressure on you, David, but I'm going to Boston. I'm not going to Boston. Sarah seemed like herself when she said that, more than she had all night, and I was glad. I'd known it, known she would leave Richard for me if I'd wanted, and I did want that, and I hadn't been wrong. All the voices on the porch seemed to rise in volume. There was a scream. I decided from inside the house, but no one paid any attention. Several hours later, I stood in front of Richard's house, trying to figure out why there were 12 cars, not including my own in the driveway. The party had started to die. About an hour before, people had slipped out one by one. I realized as I stood in front of Richard's house, smoking, sipping a cheap glass of whiskey, that I hadn't heard a single car go. Even if people had carpooled, had designated a driver, there were still too many cars in the driveway. My thoughts weren't adding up in any significant way. I was in a haze of drunk and sleepiness. Not so far gone that I wouldn't be able to collect Sarah and leave soon, but dull enough that my lines of thought were short. I stared for a while at the mountaintop. There were no houses that I could see, higher than Richard's. If the man from the peak lived up there, he must have walked from the other side of the peak, and that looked to me like a hell of a walk. I coughed, caught a coughing fit, felt a hand on my back. Prudence? I managed, still bent over. Nope, not Prudence. The voice was a voice I hadn't heard once that night, but I knew whose voice it was. "Taking in the air?" the man from the peak asked. I saw a laugh on his face. He was laughing at me. "Smoke?" I asked. "Whiskey?" I held out my drink and my cigarette. He held up a hand. His fingers were long. His nails were long. "You don't drink?" I said. He just grinned his stupid ugly grin, a set of teeth crooked and misshapen. That his speech wasn't impeded by his malformed mouth was a wonder. Indeed, his voice was the most soothing voice I'd ever heard. "So who are you?" I asked. He said, "I'm an invited guest." I remembered what I'd overheard earlier that night. I said, "I watched you come down from the peak. Are there houses up there?" He looked at the peak, followed its upward rise with his head until he'd found the very tip and said, "No, there are no houses." I thought maybe he lived in a tent or a trailer home and was just having fun with me, making me ask my questions just so. Normally, when I think someone's doing that, some cute girl who thinks she's coy or some clever boy trying to impress, I walk away without so much as a fuck. A fuck you, and that puts them out. And then they beg me for my attention. Normally, that's what I do, but I said, "But do you live on the peak? In a tent? In a trailer? In a mobile home?" I gave that ugly man from the peak all the options I could because I was desperate to hear his answer. For some reason, I was desperate to know. He said, "I live in the peak." I didn't know what he meant by "in the peak," but I smiled. I felt the dumb smile spread on my face. I smiled and nodded as if "in the peak" made all the sense in the world. I asked, "So, what is it you're doing in the backyard?" He gave me a straight answer, an awful answer, and for a moment I could see him exactly as he was. All of a sudden I could see that his clothes, from pant cuff to shirt collar, were drenched in blood and gore. Blood dripped off his shirt sleeves. Blood was pooled around his feet. There was blood on top of his bald head, and there was blood all around his mouth. The blood around his mouth was the most horrible, smeared around like finger paint. Before I became hysterical, I couldn't see the blood anymore. He looked ugly, but his clothes were clean. His pant cuffs flapped in the breeze. His bright white shirt sleeves were rolled up just below his elbows. I wondered if he could do that, why he didn't make himself look handsome to me. I think he knew my thought because he said, "Charisma. You know what I mean?" I laughed. He walked back into the house. I stood shaking my head, enjoying for a moment the great joke. Then a wave of nausea passed through me and I vomited. All spit and whiskey, and my head was clear. I rushed into the house for Sarah. I thought, "Where's Sarah?" The guest room was empty. No one was at the bar. Richard was seated on the piano bench next to the man from the peak, and there they were playing Heart and Soul. The man from the peak playing the chords, Richard plinking out the simple tune with a single finger, laughing like an idiot. I ran into Prudence out on the patio. She was drunk, but when she looked at me, she knew she was still in control. I'd known from the moment she brushed past me at the front door that the big breasts and the flirty girl voice were all for show, plumage that got Prudence what she wanted. I'd known that she was like me in that way and admired her for it. So instead of just ignoring her for Sarah, I stopped and told her that we were all in a lot of trouble. "I'd sort of picked up on that," she said, pointing with her thumb toward the backyard. Her calm was wrong. A part of all that was wrong that night. She said, "I was just leaving. My car's blocked, though. I was trying to find someone, so go out to my car. It's silver. It's the last one in the driveway. Go out to my car and wait for me. I'm going to get Sarah." She said, "Sarah? Fuck Sarah. What do you need Sarah for?" I sensed her control was limited or running low, and so she obeyed me. Started toward the driveway. Better to do as I said than to do what the man from the peak asked her to do. I went through the rear, near empty rooms, finally went into the backyard where I knew everyone must be. I tried not to understand too much of what I saw. Since there was no moonlight, no stars, I couldn't make out the exact details anyhow, but the yard was lined with bodies. Many stripped of their clothes, all flat on their back. The bodies, piled like sandbags, formed a wall along the edge of the woods. They were neatly stacked, but for a few strays, I saw Michael's body not 5 feet from where I stood. And then I saw Sarah on her feet, wandering in a daze. Became aware that heart and soul had stopped. I could hear Sarah's feet brush through the grass. I couldn't speak, I had no impulse to. I ran to Sarah, put my arm around her, and guided her toward the side of the house, away from the patio door, which was opening away from Richard, who staggered out into the yard singing heart and soul. He fell in love. He sang madly. Prudence was not in the driveway, and I thought, fine, if he has her, that'll buy me and Sarah some time, and I'm going to live, and Sarah too. I pushed Sarah along the driveway, dragged her. I opened the car and put Sarah into the passenger seat, then started the car and backed up to turn around. In the headlights, the car still facing the wrong way toward the house, I saw Prudence on her back. Her body must have been just out of sight, just under the front bumper. She jerked once. I couldn't help watching her breasts, a spray of freckles that vanished into her cleavage. The mountain road was so rutted I couldn't go fast, not without taking the chance of breaking an axle. We were close, very close to the bottom of the mountain when I heard the bang from the inside of the trunk. I jumped on the accelerator and could feel a heavy weight shift. Sarah stared calmly ahead as if we were on a day trip. There was another bang, and the trunk burst open. I couldn't see anything out the rearview mirror, just the silver trunk lid. I drove, swerving around boulders, bouncing in and out of potholes, cursing each time the front end of the car ground into dirt, until incredibly the man from the peak stared at me through the windshield. He clung to the hood on all fours, his arms and legs wide apart, face inches from the glass. He wasn't hiding himself. His teeth were bared, and he was filthy with blood, dribbling blood onto the glass, foaming blood from his nostrils. I felt suddenly quite serene. I brought the car to an easy stop. Sarah and I stepped out. The man from the peak hit himself again. He hopped off the hood with a single graceful flex of his legs. I heard stones crunch under his shoes as he walked up to Sarah. He looked at me while he put a hand on her right shoulder, and she relaxed completely. I wasn't sure what kept her from collapsing. He grabbed her hair and yanked, forcing her head to the side. She winked at me as if she were about to get a treat she'd been waiting for all day. Did I make a move to stop him? No. His eyes locked onto mine, and any desire for survival I'd had, any wish for Sarah to live, just slipped away, just leached from my thoughts. I reached into my breast pocket, slowly removed my cigarette pack, took a cigarette, tamped it against the box, lit it, and smoked. I stood, smoked, watched as he tore a chunk of flesh from Sarah's throat with those stupid buck teeth of his and opened his mouth to the jet of blood that burst from her artery. I watched him and he watched me, and was he grinning while he drank? Oh, surely he was, and I smiled back at him, smiled and smoked my cigarette, smoked so hard the filter flared up before I finally dropped my cigarette and stamped it dead. I looked up after watching my own foot twist a cigarette butt out on the dirt road, and they were gone. He and Sarah were gone. I stared up at the top of the mountain, stood for at least an hour. Finally, I was released. Trembling, I slid into the driver's seat and drove down off the mountain into Rattlesnake Valley as blue light crept across the sky. I listened to the radio for 3 days. I had the dial somewhere between stations. Sometimes one came in stronger, sometimes the other. I heard news. I heard a minister Bible teaching, organ music, chants. When both stations grew weak, I heard a murkier broadcast. 2 voices, disharmonious music, swamp static. I'd ordered all my meals by delivery for the last few days. Greasy wax paper curled in on itself, half-eaten sandwiches, flat soda, styrofoam. I spent the day in a leather armchair. I slept there. I woke often to be sure that all my windows were fastened, that the bolts on the floor had been shot, that I hadn't been careless after a delivery boy had come by, though each time I closed the door on a delivery, I locked up, leaned against the door and double-checked the locks. I worried the skin around my fingers and smoked. I'd found a stale pack in my bedroom, not my brand, someone else's cigarettes. Some woman I'd brought here had left her cigarettes. I tried to think of ways that I could have stopped what happened from happening, but there was nothing I could have done. I could have done little things differently, not waited so long to take Sarah away, not sent Prudence on her own, yet even these small acts seemed out of the realm of possibility to me, that I couldn't have behaved any way other than the way I behaved. My own personality, my own desires, took on monstrous shapes in my mind. On the third day, I remembered the book that I gave to Sarah, that slim collection of short stories. An image of that book popped into my head completely unbidden, and once that image was there, I couldn't shake it, try as I might, as if the image of that book were being broadcast directly into my head. The book must still have been at Richard's house. I could picture it in each room, on the bar, next to a clear empty bottle, in the guest room, on the couch, etc. The book, then the empty room all around it. My thoughts returned incessantly to the book. The book as object, the book as icon, the book as literature. How did those stories tie in with the events of the night? At times, just as sleep would come over me, the stories in that book would seem clearly prophetic. How could I, having read the book, not have known what was going to happen at Richard's party? I left my apartment to retrieve the book. A small part of my brain screamed at me not to, pointed out that going anywhere near Richard's house was lunacy. I drove up the mountain, tapped the steering wheel, chewed on the end of an unlit cigarette, and drove under the no trespassing sign to Richard's. I would get the book and leave. I would have the book. The sun was high and bright. There was nothing at all to going into Richard's house and getting the book, and then leaving with it. Sat on passenger seat or perhaps on my lap. Once I had the book, I would be able to settle back into my rational life. Prudence's body wasn't in the driveway. I remembered the row of corpses the man from the Peak had made. I was glad there was still a mess from the party. Bottles, ashtrays full of butts, objects displaced, leftover dip, etc. If the man from the Peak had taken the time to clean the house, that might have made me crazy. If the house had looked as it did on the occasions I'd come to visit Sarah when Richard was away, I'd have been greatly disturbed. There had been a party. The man from the Peak had come. The moment I touched the book, I knew that I hadn't come for it after all, and that I hadn't come of my own will. The Peak was a black spike, surrounded by sun. I climbed toward the Peak. I sweated heavily in my dark clothes. If someone had stood at Richard's front door, would they have been able to see me at all? Just shy of the boulders that crowned the mountain, I found the crevasse I knew was home to the man from the Peak. "I live in the Peak," he'd said. I sat down at the edge of the crevasse, a jagged open crescent, as if a sliver of the moon had burned its impression onto the side of the mountain. When I leaned over, I felt a gust of wet air, like breath. It reeked of ammonia and dirt. I'd smoke until my cigarettes were gone, and by then there wouldn't be much light left. I didn't want to be here, but I found that it was impossible to leave. In Paris, in the Mouth of Kronos, by John Langan. 1. You know how much they want for a Coke? How much? Vasquez said. €5. Can you believe that? Vasquez shrugged. She knew the gesture would irritate Buchanan, who took an almost pathological delight in complaining about everything in Paris, from the lack of air conditioning on the train ride in from de Gaulle to their narrow hotel rooms, but they had an expense account, after all, and however modest it was, she was assured €5 Coke would not deplete it. She didn't imagine the professionals sat around fretting over the cost of their sodas. To her left, the broad avenue de la Bourdonnais was surprisingly quiet. To her right, the interior of the restaurant was a den of languages. English mainly, with German, Spanish, Italian, and even a little French mixed in. In front of and behind her, the rest of the sidewalk tables were occupied by an almost even balance of old men, reading newspapers, and youngish couples wearing sunglasses. Late afternoon sunlight washed over her surroundings like a spill of white paint. Lightning everything several shades, reducing the low buildings across the avenue to hazy rectangles. When their snack was done, she would have to return to one of the souvenir shops they had passed on the walk here and buy a pair of sunglasses. Another expense for Buchanan to complain about. Monsieur? Madame? Their waiter, surprisingly middle-aged, had returned. Vous êtes? You speak English? Buchanan said. But of course, the waiter said. You're ready with your order? I'll have a cheeseburger, Buchanan said, medium rare, and a Coke, he added with a grimace. Very good, the waiter said. And for madame? Je voudrais un crêpe de chocolat, Vasquez said, et un café au lait. The waiter's expression did not change. Très bien, madame, merci, he said as Vasquez passed him their menus. A cheeseburger, she said once he had returned inside the restaurant. What? Buchanan said. Never mind. I like cheeseburgers. What's wrong with that? Nothing, it's fine. Just because I don't want to eat some kind of French food. Ooh, un crêpe, s'il vous plaît. All this, Vasquez nodded at their surroundings. It's lost on you, isn't it? We aren't here for all this, Buchanan said. We're here for Mr. White. Despite herself, Vasquez flinched. Why don't you speak a little louder? I'm not sure everyone inside the cafe heard. You think they know what we're talking about? That's not the point. Oh, what is? Operational integrity. Wow, you picked that up from the Bourne movies? One person overhears something they don't like, opens their cell phone and calls the cops. And it's all a big misunderstanding, officers. We were talking about movies, haha. And the time we lose smoothing things over with them completely fucks up Plowman's schedule. Stop worrying, Buchanan said, but Vasquez was pleased to see his face blanch at the prospect of Plowman's displeasure. For a few moments, Vasquez leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, the sun lighting the inside of her lids crimson. I'm here, she thought. The city's presence, a pressure at the base of her skull, not unlike what she'd felt patrolling the streets of Bagram, but less unpleasant. Buchanan said, So you've been here before? What? Brightness overwhelmed her vision, simplified Buchanan to a dark silhouette in a baseball cap. You parlez the français pretty well. I figure you must have spent some time. What? In college? Some kind of study abroad deal? Nope, Vasquez said. Nope what? I've never been to Paris. Hell, before I enlisted, the farthest I'd ever been from home was the class trip to Washington's senior year. You're shitting me. Don't get me wrong. I wanted to see Paris, London, everything, but the money wasn't there. The closest I came to all this were the movies in Madame Antosca's French 4 class. It was one of the reasons I joined up. I figured I'd see the world and let the army pay for it. How'd that work out for you? We're here, aren't we? Not because of the army. No, precisely because of the army. Well, she said, them and the spooks. You still think you know who was CIA? Frowning, Vasquez lowered her voice. Who knows? I'm not even sure he was one of ours. That accent, he could have been working for the Brits or the Aussies. He could have been Russian, back in town to settle a few scores. Wherever he picked up his pronunciation, dude was not regular military. Be funny if he was in Stillwater's payroll. Hysterical, Vasquez said. What about you? What about me? I assume this is your first trip to Paris? And there's where you would be wrong. Now you're shitting me. Why? Because I ordered a cheeseburger and a Coke? Among other things, yeah. My senior class trip was a week in Paris and Amsterdam. In college, at the end of my sophomore year, my parents took me to France for a month. At what she knew must be the look on her face, Buchanan added, it was an attempt at breaking up the relationship I was in at the time. It's not that. I'm trying to process the thought of you in college. Wow. Anyone ever tell you what a laugh riot you are? Did it work? Your parents' plan? Buchanan shook his head. The second I was back in the U.S., I knocked her up. We were married by the end of the summer. How romantic. Hey, Buchanan shrugged. That why you enlisted? Support your family? More or less. Heidi's dad owned a bunch of McDonald's. For the first 6 months of our marriage, I tried to assistant manage one of them. With your people skills, that must have been a match made in heaven. The retort forming on Buchanan's lips was cut short by the reappearance of their waiter, encumbered with their drinks and their food. He set their plates before them with the Madame and Monsieur. Then, as he distributed their drinks, said, Everything is okay? Ça va? Oui, Vasquez said. C'est bon, merci. With the slightest of bows, the waiter left them to their food. While Buchanan worked his hands around his cheeseburger, Vasquez said, I don't think I realized you were married. Were? Buchanan said. She wasn't happy about my deploying in the first place, and when the shit hit the fan, he bit into the burger. Through a mouthful of bun and meat, he said, the court-martial was the excuse she needed. Couldn't handle the shame, she said. The humiliation of being married to one of the guards who'd tortured an innocent man to death. What kind of role model would that be for our son? I tried to tell her it wasn't like that. It wasn't that, you know, what I'm talking about. Vasquez studied her neatly folded crepe. Yeah. Mr. White had favored a flint knife for what he called the delicate work. If that's what she wants, fine, fuck her, but she made it, so I can't see my son. The second she decided we were splitting up, there was her dad with the money for a lawyer. I get a call from this asshole. This is right in the middle of the court-martial, and he tells me Heidi's filing for divorce. No surprise, and they're going to make it easy for me. No alimony, no child support, nothing. The only catch is I have to sign away all my rights to Sam. If I don't, they're fully prepared to go to court. And how do I like my chances in front of a judge? That choice... What choice did I have? Vasquez tasted her coffee. She saw her mother holding open the front door for her, unable to meet her eyes. Bad enough about that poor bastard who died. What was his name? Is there one thing you'd think I'd know? Mahbub Ali, Vasquez said. What kind of person are you? Her father had shouted. What kind of person is part of such a thing? Mahbub Ali, Buchanan said. Bad enough what happened to him, but I just wish I'd known what was happening to the rest of us as well. They ate the rest of their meal in silence. When the waiter returned to ask if they wanted dessert, they declined. 2. Vasquez had compiled a list of reasons for crossing the avenue and walking to the Eiffel Tower. From it's an open, crowded space, it's a better place to review the plan's details, to I want to be a fucking Eiffel Tower once before I die, okay? But Buchanan agreed to her proposal without argument, nor did he complain about the 15 euros she spent on the pair of sunglasses on the walk there. Did she need to ask to know he was back in the concrete room they called the closet? It's full of the stink of fear and piss. Herself, she was doing her best not to think about the chamber under the prison's sub-basement Just Call Me Bill had taken her to. This was maybe a week after the tall, portly man she knew for a fact was CIA had started spending every waking moment with Mr. White. Vasquez had followed Bill down poured concrete stairs that led from the labyrinth of the basement and its handful of high-value captives in their scattered cells, not to mention the closet whose precise location she had been able to fix. To the sub-basement, where he had clicked on the large yellow flashlight he was carrying. Its beam had ranged over brick walls, an assortment of junk, some of it Soviet-era aircraft parts, some of it tools to repair those parts, some of it more recent. Stacks of toilet paper, boxes of plastic cutlery, a pair of hospital gurneys. They had made their way through that place to a low doorway that opened on carved stone steps whose curved surfaces testified to the passage of generations of feet. All the time, Just Call Me Bill had been talking, lecturing, detailing the history of the prison from its time as a repair center for the aircraft the Soviets flew in and out of here, until some KGB officer decided the building was perfect for housing prisoners, a change everyone who subsequently held possession of it had maintained. Vasquez had struggled to pay attention, especially as they had descended the last set of stairs and the air grew warm, moist. the rock to either side of her damp. Before, the CIA operative was saying, "Oh, before. Did you know a detachment of Alexander the Great's army stopped here?" One man returned. The stairs had ended in a wide circular area. The roof was flat, low, the walls no more than shadowy suggestions. Just Call Me Bill's flashlight had roamed the floor, picked out a symbol, and sized in the rock at their feet, a rough circle the diameter of a manhole cover, broken at about 8 o'clock. Its circumference was stained black, its interior a map of dark brown splotches. "Hold this," he had said, passing her the flashlight, which had occupied her for the 2 or 3 seconds it took him to remove a plastic baggie from one of the pockets of his safari vest. When Vasquez had directed the light at him, he was dumping the bag's contents in his right hand, tugging at the plastic with his left to pull it away from the dull red wad. The stink of the blood and meat on the turn had made her step back, steady specialist. The bag's contents had landed inside the broken circle with a heavy wet smack. Vasquez had done her best not to study it too closely. A sound, the scrape of bare flesh dragging over stone, from behind and to her left had spun Vasquez around. The flashlight held out to blind, her sidearm freed and following the light's path. This section of the curving wall opened in a black arc, like the top of an enormous throat. For a moment, that space had been full of a great, pale figure. Vasquez had had a confused impression of hands large as tires grasping either side of the arc. A boulder of a head, its mouth gaping amidst a frenzy of beard, its eyes vast. Idiot. It was scrambling towards her. She didn't know where to aim. And then Mr. White had been standing in the archway, dressed in the white linen suit that somehow always seemed stained even though no discoloration was visible on any of it. He had not blinked at the flashlight beam stabbing his face, nor had he appeared to judge Vasquez's gun pointing at him with much concern. Muttering an apology, Vasquez had lowered gun and light immediately. Mr. White had ignored her, strolling across the round chamber to the foot of the stairs, which he had climbed quickly. Just Call Me Bill had hurried after. A look on his bland face that Vasquez took for amusement. She had brought up the rear, sweeping the flashlight over the floor as she reached the lowest step. The broken circle had been empty except for a red smear that shone in the light. That she had momentarily hallucinated, Vasquez had not once doubted. Things with Mr. White already had raced past what even Just Call Me Bill had shown them, and however effective his methods, Vasquez was afraid that all of them had finally gone too far, crossed over into truly bad territory. Combined with a mild claustrophobia that had caused her to fill the dark space with a nightmare, however reasonable that explanation, the shape with which her mind had replaced Mr. White had plagued her. Had she seen the devil stepping toward on his goat's feet, one red hand using his pitchfork to balance himself? It would have made more sense than that giant form. It was as if her subconscious was telling her more about Mr. White than she understood. Prior to that trip, Vasquez had not been at ease around the man who never seemed to speak so much as to have spoken, so that you knew what he'd said even though you couldn't remember hearing him saying it, after she gave him a still wider berth. Ahead, the Eiffel Tower swept up into the sky. Vasquez had seen it from a distance, at different points along hers and Buchanan's journey from their hotel towards the scene, but the closer she drew to it, the less real it seemed. It was as if the very solidity of the beams and girders weaving together were evidence of their falseness. I am seeing the Eiffel Tower, she told herself. I am actually looking at the goddamn Eiffel Tower. Here you are, Buchanan said. Happy? Something like that. The great square under the tower was full of tourists. From the sound of it, the majority of them groups of Americans and Italians. Nervous men wearing untucked shirts over their jeans flitted from group to group. Street vendors, Velasquez realized. each one carrying an oversized ring strung with metal replicas of the tower. A pair of gendarmes, their hands draped over the machine guns slung high on their chests, let their eyes roam the crowd while they carried on a conversation. In front of each of the tower's legs, lines of people waited for the chance to ascend it, doubled and redoubled back on themselves. Enormous fans misting water over them. Taking Buchanan's arm, Vasquez steered them towards the nearest fan. Eyebrows raised, he tilted his head towards hers. Ambient noise, she said. Whatever. Once they were close enough to the van's propeller drone, Vasquez leaned into Buchanan. Go with this, she said. You're the boss. Buchanan gazed up, a man debating whether he wanted to climb that high. I've been thinking, Vasquez said. Plowman's plan's shit. Oh? He pointed at the tower's first level, 300 feet above. Nodding, Vasquez said, we approach Mr. White, and he's just going to agree to come with us to the elevator? Buchanan dropped his hand. Well, we do have our persuaders. How do you like that? Was it cryptic enough? Or should I have said guns? Vasquez smiled as if Buchanan had uttered an endearing remark. You really think Mr. White is going to be impressed by a pair of 22s? A bullet's a bullet besides. Buchanan returned her smile. Isn't the plan for us not to have to use the guns? Aren't we relying on him remembering us? It's not like we were BFFs. If it were me, I wanted the guy and I had access to Stillwater's resources. I wouldn't be wasting my time on a couple of convicted criminals. I'd put together a team and go get them. Besides 20 grand apiece for catching up to someone outside his hotel room, passing a couple of words with him, then escorting him to an elevator. Tell me that doesn't sound too good to be true. You know the way these big companies work? They're all about throwing money around. Your problem is you're still thinking like a soldier. Even so, why spend it on us? Maybe Plowman feels bad about everything. Maybe this is his way of making it up to us. Plowman, seriously? Buchanan shook his head. This isn't that complicated. Vasquez closed her eyes. Humor me. She leaned her head against Buchanan's chest. What have I been doing? We're a feint. While we're distracting Mr. White, Plowman's up to something else. Like, maybe Mr. White has something in his room. Maybe we're occupying him while Plowman's retrieving it. You know, there are easier ways for Plowman to steal something. Maybe we're keeping Mr. White in place so Plowman can pull a hit on him. Again, there are simpler ways to do that would have nothing to do with us. You knock on the guy's door, he opens it, pow. What if we're supposed to get caught in the crossfire? You bring us all the way here just to kill us. Didn't you say big companies like to spend money? But why take us out in the first place? Vasquez raised her head and opened her eyes. How many of the people who knew Mr. White are still in circulation? There's just Call Me Bill. You think he's CIA? We don't know what happened to him. Okay, there's you, me, Plowman. Go on. Buchanan paused, reviewing. Vasquez knew the fates of the 3 other guards who'd assisted Mr. White with his work in the closet. Long before news had broken about Mabub Ali's death, Lavelle had sat on the edge of his bunk, placed his gun in his mouth, and squeezed the trigger. Then, when the shitstorm had started, Maxwell on patrol had been stabbed in the neck by an insurgent who targeted only him. Finally, in the holding cell awaiting his court-martial, Ruiz had taken advantage of a lapse in his jailer's attention to strip off his pants, twist them into a rope, and hang himself from the top bunk of his cell's bunk bed. His guards had cut him down in time to save his life, but Ruiz had deprived his brain of oxygen for sufficient time to leave him a vegetable. When Buchanan spoke, he said, "Coincidence? Or conspiracy?" God damn it. Buchanan pulled free of Vasquez and headed for the long rectangular park that stretched behind the tower, speedwalking. His legs were sufficiently long that she had to jog to catch up to him. Buchanan did not slacken his pace, continuing his straight line up the middle of the park, through the midst of bemused picnickers. Jesus Christ, Vasquez called. Will you slow down? He would not. Heedless of oncoming traffic, Buchanan led her across a pair of roads that traversed the park. Horns blaring, tires screaming, cars swerving around them. At this rate, Vasquez thought, Plowman's motives won't matter. Once they were safely on the grass again, she sped up until she was beside him, then reached high on the other side of Buchanan's right arm, not far from the armpit, and pinched as hard as she could. Ow, shit! Yanking his arm up and away, Buchanan stopped. Rubbing his skin, he said, What the hell, Vasquez? What the hell are you doing? Walking, what did it look like? Running away? Fuck you! Fuck you, you candy-ass pussy! Buchanan's eyes flared. I'm trying to work this shit out so we can stay alive. You're so concerned about seeing your son, maybe you'd want to help me. Why are you doing this? Buchanan said. Why are you fucking with my head? Why are you trying to fuck this up? There's nothing to work out. We've got a job to do. We do it. We get the rest of our money. We do the job well. There's a chance Stillwater will add us to their payroll. That happens. I'm making that kind of money. I hire myself a pit bull of a lawyer and stick him on fucking Heidi. You want to live in goddamn Paris? You can eat a croissant for breakfast every morning. You honestly believe that? Yes, I do. Vasquez held his gaze, but who was she kidding? She could count on one finger the number of stare-downs she'd won. Her arms, legs, everything felt suddenly incredibly heavy. She looked at her watch. Come on, she said, starting in the direction of Avenue de la Bourdonnaise. We can catch a cab. 3. Plowman had insisted they meet him at an airport cafe before they foot outside De Gaulle. At the end of those 10 minutes, which had consisted of Plowman asking details of their flight and instructing them how to take the RER to the metro, to the stop nearest their hotel, he had passed Vasquez a card for a restaurant where he had said the three of them would reconvene at 3 p.m. local time to review the evening's plans. Vasquez had been relieved to see Plowman seated at a table outside the cafe. Despite the $10,000 gathering interest in her checking account, the plane ticket that had been FedExed to her apartment, followed by the receipt for 4 nights stay at the hotel Renee, she had been unable to shake the sense that none of this was as it appeared, that it was the setup to an elaborate joke whose punchline would come at her expense. Plowman's solid form, dressed in a black suit whose tailored lines announced the upward shift of his pay grade, had confirmed that everything he had told her the afternoon he had sought her out at Anderson's farm had been true. Or true enough to quiet momentarily the misgivings that had whispered ever louder in her ears the last 2 weeks, to the point that she had held her cell open in her left hand, the piece of paper with Plowman's number on it in her right, ready to call him and say she was out. He could have had his money back. She hadn't spent any of it. During the long hot train ride from the airport to the metro station, when Buchanan had complained about Plowman not letting them out of his sight, treating them like goddamn kids, Vasquez had found an explanation on her lips. It's probably the first time he's run an operation like this, she had said. He wants to be sure he dots all his I's and crosses all his T's. Buchanan had harumphed, but it was true. Plowman obsessed over minutiae. It was one of the reasons he'd been in charge of their detail at prison. Until the shit had buried the fan, that attentiveness had seemed to forecast his steady climb up the chain of command. At his court-martial, however, his enthusiasm for exact strikes on prisoner nerve clusters, his precision in placing arm restraints so that a prisoner's shoulders would not dislocate when he was hoisted off the floor by his bonds, his speed in obtaining the various surgical and dental instruments Just Call Me Bill requested had been counted liabilities rather than assets, and he had been the only one of their group to serve substantial time at Leavenworth, 10 months. Still, the Walther Vasquez had requested had been waiting where Plowman had promised it would be. topped with an extra clip and a waterproof bag secured inside the tank of her hotel room's toilet. A thorough inspection had reassured her that all was in order with the gun, its ammunition. If he were setting her up, would Plowman have wanted to arm her? Her proficiency at the target range had been well known, and while she hadn't touched a gun since her discharge, she had no doubts of her ability. Tucked within the pack of her jeans, draped by her blouse, the pistol was easily accessible. That's assuming, of course, that Plowman's even there tonight, but the caution was a formality. Plowman being Plowman, there was no way he was not going to be at Mr. White's hotel. Was there any need for him to have made the trip to West Virginia, to have tracked her to Anderson's farm, to have sought her out in the far barns, where she'd been using a high-pressure hose to sluice pig shit into gutters? An email, a phone call would have sufficed. Such methods, however, would have left too much outside Plowman's immediate control, and since he appeared able to dunk his bucket into a well of cash deeper than any she'd known, he had decided to find Vasquez and speak to her directly. He'd done the same with Buchanan. She'd learned on the flight over, tracking him to the suburb of Chicago, where he'd been shift manager at Hardee's. If the man had gone to much lengths to persuade them to take the job, if he had been there to meet them at the Charles de Gaulle, and was waiting for them even now as their taxi crossed the scene, and headed towards the Champs-Élysées, was there any chance he wouldn't be present later on? Of course he wouldn't be alone. Plowman would have the reassurance of God only knew how many Stillwater employees, which was to say, mercenaries, no doubt heavily armed and armored, backing him up. Vasquez hadn't had much to do with the company's personnel. They tended to roost closer to the center of Kabul, where the high-value targets, their guarded, huddled. Iraq, that was where Stillwater's bootprint was deepest. From what Vasquez had heard, the former soldiers riding the reinforced Lincoln Navigators through Baghdad not only made about 5 times what they had in military, they followed rules of engagement that were, to put it mildly, less robust. While Paris was as far east as she was willing to travel, she had to admit the prospect of that kind of money made Baghdad, if not appealing, at least unappealing. And what would Dad have to say to that? No matter that his eyes were failing, the center of his vision consumed by macular degeneration. Her father had lost none of his passion for the news, employing a standing magnifier to aid him as he pored over the day's New York Times and Washington Post, sitting in his favorite chair listening to All Things Considered on WVPN, even venturing online to BBC using the computer whose monitor settings she had adjusted for him before she deployed. Her father would not have missed the reports of Stillwater's involvement in several incidents in Iraq that were less shootouts than several turkey shoots, not to mention the ongoing congressional inquiry into their policing of certain districts of post-Katrina and Rita, New Orleans, as well as an event in upstate New York last summer when one of their employees had taken a camping trip that had left 2 of his 3 companions dead under what could best be described as suspicious circumstances. She could hear his words, heavy with the accent that had accredited as he'd aged. Was this why I suffered in the Villa Grimaldi? So my daughter could join the Caravana de la Muerta? The same question he'd asked her the first night she'd returned home. All the same, it wasn't as if his opinion of her was going to drop any further. If I'm damned, she thought, I might as well get paid for it. That said, she was in no hurry to certify her ultimate destination, which returned her to the problem of Plowman and his plan. You would have expected the press of the 22 against the small of her back to have been reassuring, but instead it only emphasized her sense of powerlessness, as if Plowman were so confident, so secure, he could allow her whatever firearm she wanted. The cab turned in to the Champs-Élysées. Ahead, the Arc de Triomphe squatted in the distance, another monument to cross off the list. 4. The restaurant whose card Plowman had handed her was located on one of the side streets about halfway to the Ark. Vasquez and Buchanan departed their cab at the street's corner and walked the 100 yards to a door flanked by man-sized plaster Chinese dragons. Buchanan brushed past the black-suited host and his welcome, smiling and murmuring, "Pardonnez, nous avons un rendezvous ici?" Vasquez pursued him into the dim interior, up a short flight of stairs. Buchanan strode across the floor that glowed with pale light glass. Vasquez saw thick squares suspended over shimmering aquamarine. A carpet the size of her forearm darted underneath her, and she realized that she was standing on top of an enormous, shallow fish tank. Brown and white and orange carp racing one another across its bottom, jostling the occasional slower turtle. With one exception, the tables supported by the glass were empty. Too late, Vasquez supposed, for lunch, and too early for dinner, or maybe the food here wasn't that good. His back to the far wall, Plowman was seated at a table directly in front of her. Already Buchanan was lowering himself into a chair opposite him. Stupid, Vasquez thought at the expanse of his unguarded back. Her boots clacked on the glass. She moved around the table to sit beside Plowman, who had exchanged the dark suit in which he'd greeted them in Tagawa for the tan jacket over a cream shirt and slacks. His outfit caught the light, filtering from below them, and held it in as dull a sheen. A metal bowl filled with dumplings was centered on the table mat before him. To its right, a slice of lemon floated at the top of the glass of clear liquid. Plowman's eyebrow raised as she settled beside him, but he did not comment on her choice. Instead, he said, "You're here." Vasquez's "yes" was overridden by Buchanan's "We are, and there are some things we need cleared up." Vasquez stared at him. Plowman said, "Oh?" "That's right," Buchanan said. "We've been thinking, and this plan of yours doesn't add up." "Really?" The tone of Plowman's voice did not change. "Really?" Buchanan nodded. "Would you care to explain to me exactly how it doesn't add up?" "You expect Vasquez and me to believe you spent all this money so the two of us can have a 5-minute conversation with Mr. White?" Vasquez flinched. "There's a little bit more to it than that. We're supposed to persuade him to walk 20 feet with us to an elevator. Actually, it's 74 feet 3 inches. Whatever." Buchanan glanced at Vasquez. She looked away. To the wall to her right, water chuckled down a series of small rock terraces through an opening in the floor into the fish tank. "No, not whatever." Buchanan, 74 feet 3 inches, Plowman said. "This is why the biggest responsibility you confront each day is lifting the fry basket out of the hot oil when the buzzer tells you to. You don't pay attention to the little things." The host was standing at Buchanan's elbow, his hands clasped over a pair of long menus. Plowman nodded at him, and he passed the menus to Vasquez and Buchanan. Inclining towards them, the host said, "May I bring you drinks while you decide your order?" His eyes on the menu, Buchanan said, "Water." "Muy asti," Vasquez said. "Merci." "Nice accent," Plowman said when the host had left. "Thanks. I don't think I realized you speak French." Vasquez shrugged. "Wasn't any call for it, was there?" "Anything else?" Plowman said. "Spanish." "I understand more than I can speak." "You folks were from where again?" "Chile," Vasquez said. "My mom's American, but her parents were from Argentina." "That's useful to know." "For when Stillwater hires her," Buchanan said. "Yes," Plowman answered. "The company has projects underway in a number of places where fluency in French and Spanish would be an asset, such as—" "One thing at a time," Plowman said. "Let's get through tonight first, and then you can worry about your next assignment." "And what's that going to be?" Buchanan said. "Another 20K to walk someone to an elevator?" "I doubt it'll be anything so mundane," Plowman said. "I also doubt it'll pay as little as $20,000. Look, Vasquez started to say, but the host had returned with their water. Once he deposited their glasses on the table, he withdrew a pad and pen from his jacket pocket and took Buchanan's order of crispy duck and Vasquez's of steamed dumplings. After he had retrieved the menus and gone, Plowman turned to Vasquez and said, "You were saying?" "It's just what Buchanan's trying to say is, it's a lot, you know? If you'd offered us, I don't know, just $500 a piece to come here and play escort, that still would have been a lot, but it wouldn't, $20,000 plus the airfare, the hotel, the expense account. It seems too much for what you're asking us to do. Can you understand that?" Plowman shook his head. "Yes, I can. I can understand how strange it might appear to offer this kind of money for this length of service, but..." He raised his drink to his lips. When he lowered his arm, the glass was half drained. "Mr. White is... to say he's high value doesn't begin to cover it. The guy's been around. He's been around. Talk about a font of information. The stuff this guy's forgotten would be enough for a dozen careers. What he remembers will give whoever can get him to share it with them permanent tactical advantage." "No such thing," Buchanan said. "No matter how much the guy says he knows." Yes. Plowman held up his hand like a traffic cop. "Trust me, he's high value. But won't the spooks..." "What's just call me Bill have to say about this?" Vasquez said. "Bill's dead." Simultaneously, Buchanan said, "Huh?" And Vasquez, "What? How?" "I don't know. When my bosses greenlighted me for this, Bill was the first person I thought of. I wasn't sure if he was still with the agency, so I did some checking around. I couldn't find out much. Goddamn spooks kept their mouths shut, but I was able to determine that Bill was dead. It sounded like it might have been that chopper crash in Helmand, but that's a guess. To answer your question, Vasquez, Bill didn't have a whole lot to say." "Shit," Buchanan said. "Okay." Vasquez exhaled. "Okay, was he the only one who knew about Mr. White?" "I find it hard to believe he was," Plowman said. "But thus far, no one's nibbled at any of the bait I've left out. I'm surprised, I'll admit it, but it makes our job that much simpler, so I'm not complaining." "All right," Vasquez said, "but the money." His eyes alight, Plowman leaned forward. "To get my hands on Mr. White, I would have paid each of you 10 times as much. That's how important this operation is. Whatever we have to shell out now is nothing compared to what we're going to gain from this guy." "Now you tell us?" Buchanan said. Plowman smiled and relaxed back. "Well, the bean counters do appreciate it when you control costs." He turned to Vasquez. "Well, have your concerns been addressed?" "Hey," Buchanan said, "I was the one asking the questions." "Please," Plowman said, "I was in charge of you, remember? Whatever your virtues, Buchanan, original thought is not among them." "What about Mr. White?" Vasquez said. "Suppose he doesn't want to come with you?" "I don't imagine he will," Plowman said, "nor do I expect him to be terribly interested in assisting us once he is in our custody." "That's okay." Plowman picked up one of the chopsticks along his plate, turned it in his hand, and jabbed it into a dumpling. He lifted the dumpling to his mouth momentarily. Vasquez pictured a giant bringing its teeth together on a human head. While he chewed, Plowman said, "To be honest, I hope the son of a bitch is feeling especially stubborn. Because of him, I lost everything that was good in my life. Because of that fucker, I did time in prison. Fucking prison!" Plowman swallowed, speared another dumpling. "Believe me when I say, Mr. White and I have a lot of quality time coming." Beneath them, half a dozen carp that had been floating lazily scattered. I think we're going to leave it on this chapter 5, but let's just get through the first couple paragraphs or whatever, and then we're going to ease out. 5. Buchanan was all for finding Mr. White's hotel and parking themselves in its lobby. "What?" Vasquez said. Behind a couple of newspapers, stuck in traffic on what should have been the short way to the Concord Opera, where Mr. White had the junior suite Their cab was full of the reek of exhaust, the low rumble of cars surrounding them. Sure, yeah, that'd work. Jesus, and I'm the one who's seen too many movies? What? Buchanan said. Number one, at this rate, it'll be at least 6 before we get there. How many people sit around reading the day's paper at night? The whole point of news is it's new. Maybe we're on vacation. Doesn't matter. We'll still stick out. And number two, even if the lobby's full of tourists, holding newspapers up in front of their faces, Plowman's plan doesn't kick in until 11. You telling me no one's going to notice the same people sitting there doing the same thing for 5 hours? For all we know, Mr. White will see us on his way out and coming back. Well, it's been a pretty interesting story so far, I must say. Once again, Vasquez, you're overthinking this. People don't see what they don't expect to see. Mr. White isn't expecting us in the lobby of his plush hotel Ergo. He won't notice us there. Are you kidding? This isn't people. This is Mr. White. Get a grip. He eats, shits, and sleeps, same as you and me. For the briefest of instants, the window over Buchanan's shoulder was full of the enormous face Vasquez had glimpsed, hallucinated in the caves under the prison. Not for the first time, she was struck by the crudeness of the features, as if a sculptor had hurriedly struck out the approximation of a human visage on a piece of rock already formed to suggest it. That is the end of our evening story time with me, TessaTNT. It's been a pretty good book so far. I love having different stories instead of, I don't know, just reading the same story forever. It kind of makes time fly by a little faster and is a bit more amusing. I don't know. I really like short stories, I guess. But thank you so much once again for hanging out with me tonight. It was my pleasure hanging out with you and hopefully entertaining you. Thank you to all of my friends out there, wherever you may be listening Beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend, when we'll be doing trippy TikToks and story time again, I'm sure. Don't forget, we're all in this together. Together, we can make the world better, and together, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. If you want to drop me a story, you can send it by mail to P.O. Box 663, Bayfield, Colorado 81122, or email it to weareparadoxmedia@gmail.com. Night-night, love and light. Take care of my ewes. Have an awesome week. Like I said, it's summertime now, so we'll try to get in here more days of the week, and I've been throwing around some show ideas, but